Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. I call the December 11th, 2023 school board meeting to order. It is 6:03 p.m. and we are in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the room.
Mr. Morris.
He's
Doctor.
excused.
Dr. Hoyk. Here. Ms. Willis. Here. Dr. Worley. Here. Ms. Heimer Rolland. Here. Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Here. We do have quorum this evening. We will begin with an opportunity for public comment. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. Board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comments on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issues raised. However, it is not the intended public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into a debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. Dr. Hoyt, would you mind doing the overarching 30-minute timer? We've got 30 minutes set aside for public comment this evening. If anybody has any comment, if you'd like to come to the microphone, we'll take public comment in the room. I'll give an opportunity if anybody's online, and then we'll come back and take our last public comment opportunity in the room. So please come on up, and you've got 3 minutes.
Hi guys, Sunny Iwansky, 71st Street, Wauwatosa. I just wanted to start by asking if there's a consistent practice at district events to discuss the mission, vision, and values as a tone setting piece of any and every meeting. One thing I wanted to commend Dr. Merble on is when we do the curriculum committee, we discuss the mission, the vision, and the values as part of our process. And I was just hoping that we were doing that in a more broad sense and a more consistent sense across the district so that people really understand the purpose and their why. And I will recommend Simon Sinek Start With Why, 18-minute TED Talk.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalie Wegman. My daughter Iris Wegman attends Jefferson Elementary School. She's in 1st grade. She also has a 4-year-old sister named Opal that we are planning on enrolling in open enrollment next year for junior kindergarten. I want to start out by saying that I really don't understand a lot of the school board setting. I'm just starting to learn and participate in all the emails that you guys have been sending. I've read them before, but I felt like they were kind of over my head. In reading over the documents this weekend about the open enrollment information, I'm concerned if you start out phasing out the open enrollment students, particularly for my daughter, Opal, who will not get in. For example, if you go with the minimum amount of open enrollment students, Opal would not have a chance to be with her sister in any TOSA school. Let's say you further that phase out for the following year. She will not get to be with her sister the next year. Now, what I'm asking at this meeting at the meeting at the Jefferson School District on November 17th, the question was answered by Dr. Means about possibly grandfathering in the existing siblings of open enrollment students regardless of space. I'm asking that you please consider this. My daughter Iris absolutely loves Jefferson. She loves her friends, she loves her teachers. We are not part of the TOSA school district, but we feel loved by all the community. And I want Opal to feel that same way about Jefferson, about TOSA. There are several other kids in Iris's class with siblings that are smaller that this would also affect. If you want your school district and community to feel like a family, you shouldn't be breaking up current open enrollment students. And I would please just ask you to please consider grandfathering in if you're gonna cut out the open enrollment students and phase them out. Because I don't know where we will go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stacey Bell, and I have a 7th grader at Longfellow and a 10th grader at East. I've been on several parent committees at Jefferson Elementary School when my children attended Jefferson. I am my daughter's Girl Scout leader from first grade through seventh grade. We're still going strong as middle schoolers. My husband was a TBL coach for rec basketball for my son and a junior Raiders assistant coach. We've donated all the teacher appreciation we can. Today, I just bought a cello humidifier. I did not know such a thing existed, but if Miss Rods needs one, I will help. But I think what sets me apart from other TOSA families is my zip code. My zip code. I don't have a TOSA zip code. And lately I've been feeling like that makes me a burden financially. And I think some people even look at it as discipline wise, that my kids are a burden. I would say, I can proudly say, I feel as though my kids are very well behaved, well respected in school. My son even made the comment in second grade, I'm the only student that never has moved my clip down all of second grade. We're a proud biracial family, and I think we contribute our fair share. And, you know, we live in Menominee Falls. We're not this burdened Milwaukee family that I think is the face of open enrollment. That is not the case. You know, we're not, we could go to Menominee Falls. We choose TOSA because of the diversity and many other reasons. And so I just ask that you guys look at what we're contributing as open enrollment families and not what we're taking away from the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who has public comment this evening? Jamie, is there anybody online?
No, there are no hands raised.
Thank you. I will close public comment for the evening. Thank you all very much. Our first item up is the consent agenda. Are there any items in the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action? Seeing none.
It is recommended that the school board approve the consent agenda, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Wills. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris, Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer. Mr. Meyer,
Oh, I'm sorry, my hearing. Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes. And the consent agenda does pass. Thank you. First item is a big one. Strategic Goal 1, academic performance. Action to approve JK through fifth grade English language arts curriculum adoption materials. And Ms. Heimer-Roland, in this motion, please note that there's a typo. It should read approve the K through fifth grade English language arts. So if you want to just articulate K, it's the K through fifth. JK is not included in this curriculum adoption.
It is recommended that the school board approve the K through fifth grade English language arts curriculum adoption materials, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Worley. We had a long and I think really rigorous conversation about this 2 weeks ago. I know there was lots of questions from the board on this item. I want to turn to our colleagues on the district team who are here with us this evening. If you could reintroduce yourself for folks who are in the room or online watching who maybe weren't able to last week. And then if there's anything kind of additional you wanted to reset or talk through, and then we'll have any kind of questions from the board, and then we'll see if we're ready to move forward with the vote.
Sounds great. I am Jessica Ebert. I am the Director of Curriculum.
I'm Nicole Marble, the Chief Academic Officer.
Brenda Jones, Elementary Curriculum Coordinator.
All right. So as Mr. Jessvinger was saying, is on November 27th, myself, elementary curriculum coordinator Brenda Jones, and several members of the review team were here to discuss elementary English language arts, also referred to as ELA. What was brought forward to the board and the community on the 27th was an overview of the work that has occurred to date and the needs and the future of elementary ELA. Following the board conversation on the 27th, several action steps were taken, and we'd like to begin this evening with an update on those actions. There we go. Okay. One action taken was to make materials and resources available at several open houses as well as online via our curriculum webpage. Families and community members were encouraged to attend these events or email the curriculum team with questions and/or perspectives within the 2-week window, really for us to provide that clarity and engage in open discourse and conversation related to elementary ELA. Within the 2-week period, we received 0 inquiries via email and 0 attendees at the open house events. On December 6th, I was able to attend the Wauwatosa Commission for People with Disabilities with Special Education Director Stacy Clem. The goal of this meeting was to provide an update and overview of elementary ELA programming before the board. We focused on what the resources and materials provide and how the work and vision for future programming aim to serve all students, including students receiving specialized supports and services within English language arts. The questions and conversations were supportive as we collaborate to improve learning for all. Furthermore, the curriculum team, alongside our Chief Academic Officer, continue to engage with the Department of Public Instruction to learn about Act 20 and timelines within the legislation. Confirmation was given that there would be no list outlining recommended resources by January 1st, and the timelines and work around Act 20 are still fluid. In other words, deadlines continue to shift. Finally, Brenda Jones, elementary ELA curriculum coordinator, and myself continue to engage deeply in learning related to elementary ELA and Act 20. Together, we met with the elementary principals to discuss goals around programming and implementation. One question asked of our team on the 27th was to provide greater clarity on how we will monitor effectiveness. The graphic on the screen outlines ways in which we will monitor programming closely. It is important to note that there are certain measures we will continue to elevate for the board and the community, and other measures that we will internally monitor. These measurements include both quantitative outcomes such as STAR, Fast Bridge, Forward, Common Assessments, intervention numbers, and IEP referrals, as well as qualitative measures including surveys, observations, and focus groups. To further provide clarity related to monitoring for effectiveness, we have identified hallmarks of success. Our milestones, specifically 1, 2, and 4 for ELA, communicate quantitative hallmarks of success as we aim to achieve 90% or more of students reaching end-of-year benchmarks on early literacy measures, 90% or more of students making expected or high growth as measured by STAR, and 90% or more of student proficiency on those grade level standards as measured by the Forward State Assessment. Qualitative measures of success include increased teacher confidence with instruction related to elementary ELA, increased teacher efficacy with planning and preparation, planning conversations shifting. So, focusing more on how we're responding to students' needs versus what is being taught. A greater coherence from one classroom and school to the next, and student satisfaction related to effective needs such as choice, agency, engagement, relevancy, and collaboration. As we consider the future of elementary English language arts, we are prepared to closely monitor programming and make the necessary adjustments to march towards these measures of success. Furthermore, we understand the responsibility before us and the diligent and strategic work that is necessary to reach our overall measure of success, which is our vision. And so with that overview and update, we look forward to further questions and continued dialogue to ensure you feel well equipped and prepared to make this important vote for our students and staff.
Thank you all for those updates. Is there anybody who would like to start with questions? And then we'll just head around the table and try to bring as well. So let's start with you, and then I'll come to Who wants to go second? We'll go, you can just pass and then we'll just swing all the way around if that's okay. Then I'll keep it normal in my head. Please.
First, I'd like to start by thanking you all for your hard work and dedication in evaluating these curriculums. I'll just reiterate the importance of a strong literacy foundation in education, and it was clearly lacking in Wauwatosa. And I'm so pleased that you have landed on such a comprehensive curriculum. I asked this question last meeting, and I'll ask it again. And maybe from a different perspective, as we look to face a budget shortfall, you have given us, I think, 11 different options on that we can approve for this curriculum. Is there any flexibility in phasing this curriculum in and capitalizing on the grant money that we have, the ESSER funds, and then potentially using some funds for next year, just as we consider this budget shortfall? That's where my pause is. I think this is an excellent curriculum, but I think that we as a board have a financial responsibility to ask these tough questions and see if there's any flexibility. But I also understand as a teacher that, it's important to have a comprehensive resource. And that's what we have lacked in the past. So those are my questions.
Thank you for that question. And Mr. Brightman, I'll invite you to jump into if I misspeak or say something or don't say something that I should have said. So when we look at all of the curriculums that we have brought forward, whether it be the high school curriculums that you all approved of a couple of months ago, back in October, and the one that's in front of you today, if we look at all of those together, 66% of the funds necessary to fund those curriculum materials comes from grants that will expire. I believe one of them will expire in the end of June and one will expire in September. So we are funding less than half of this out of Fund 10. It's actually advantageous if we were to move forward with the ELA curriculum at this time because we do have the grant funds available to us. When we look at just elementary ELA, 75% of everything that we're asking for, the top tier model that we're asking for would be coming out of grant funds.
I think it's a much larger amount than we approved before, nearly $1.8 million. And looking at the most comprehensive ask that you guys have, is there any way to capitalize on some of the other curricular material that we have that was just approved several years ago? I don't know. I'm not an expert in ELA curriculum. So those are the questions I have. Like, is there any flexibility in kind of utilizing what we have in the district in order to just not increase that budget shortfall that we're projecting?
Absolutely. So everything that we currently have in the district, I think we're talking more or less around the intervention. That's really what tips, I think, the scale for some individuals are the intervention materials. And I invite either one of you to chime in as well. What we're asking for with the intervention materials is a cohesive thread between the core tier 1 instruction all the way through to our students that have the most needed support in ELA. So our students that receive tier 3 interventions or receive special education services for reading needs. And while we do have some interventions that we can, and we will continue to utilize with students that need that level of support, this provides a very cohesive thread between what students are experiencing on the day-to-day lesson and then what they're experiencing with their intervention. Right now, that the gap that exists between how students have to translate what's happening with their intervention to what's happening in the classroom, that doesn't always materialize for students. And so this helps provide that background knowledge and that cohesion, like I said. What am I missing?
I think just a helpful way to frame it, possibly, it feels like, am I on?
Yeah, no.
It feels like a really lofty ELA curriculum purchase, but I think I just want to make it really clear that we utilize the ELA curriculum opportunity to bring in other like arms and legs of our system to think about how we're serving all of our students. So yes, the bulk is those ELA core comprehensive curriculum. That cannot be siloed out because that actually, one, isn't in line with evidence-based practices, and two, it would take us right back to our teachers trying to figure out how to have the thread. So that cohesive core curriculum cannot be piecemealed out. But I think just a reframing and understanding of, yes, we are asking for this with the ELA curriculum, but this is actually, we're purchasing materials that will support our entire system. So I think maybe that's why it feels a little bit different, because this will bring in our special education teachers, our special education department, our academic specialists, so that now we're not talking in different languages. We're starting to speak the same language and work to serve our students together.
No, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I will add that the adoption that took place in 2020, finances for special education, multi-language education, that was not secured. There were no finances for that. And so we had to then go back and try to piecemeal some different things together. We're bringing everything up front. So also our academic specialist team, our school growth coordinators have been engaging in a number of vetting processes of other interventions. So the two intervention platforms, the phonics intervention and steps to advance, those have, for lack of a better word, cut the mustard in terms of the vetting process. And if we didn't bring them now, we would probably be coming back and asking for them in the future. So we just wanted to be open and transparent in the overall cost, because I know that's been an ask of the board as well, to foreshadow what is the overall cost and not coming back and saying, now we need this and now we need this.
They pretty much have covered everything, but I think just being able to add on that we're looking at this across 5 years too. So everything before you is across a 5-year interim kind of timeline versus this is a one-time cost. So when we think about each year, students receive kind of their individual booklets that correspond with different units. Typically, we're bringing subscription costs back to the board kind of in May and saying we need this much money for this continuation of subscription. That's all being taken care of here as we think about classroom libraries, as we think about student kind of consumable materials as well. It's all included in this holistic cost. So I just wanted to kind of outline that as well.
So I think what I'm hearing is that if we don't purchase this comprehensively, then we aren't meeting the needs of some of our most vulnerable learners, correct? And also that in the next 5 years, the district is not going to come to the board and ask for more curriculum or resources for our elementary ELA. Am I understanding those two things?
Yes.
That we can crystal ball project, yes.
I mean, yes, that this is that comprehensive, that there is no anticipated materials or resources that will be needed in the next 5 years. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for, again, providing such a thorough presentation and bringing in so many voices to really amplify how great this curriculum is. Has everybody?
The only question I have, so all of the options include money for classroom teachers for their libraries, only 2nd through 5th. So what about kindergarten and 1st grade?
Great question. So in the initial upfront costs, we've already invested some funds in our early elementary classrooms for decodables, but then you can see that there is an ongoing expense for classroom libraries that does account for all K through 5 classrooms. So that would be the ongoing that we would kind of catch back up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think like Ms. Willis, my primary concern is the cost, particularly as we know we're facing a budget shortfall. I really appreciated the communication with the early literacy curriculum council at the state level so that we would have a better understanding of whether waiting a month or a few weeks would make a difference. And while it's very disappointing to hear that the curriculum council won't have anything for us at that point, it's helpful to know going into a vote that there probably won't be anything until much later in the spring, which would make it more difficult, I understand, to roll this out for a September start date. I do have, and I also appreciated, we did hear as a board, we heard from some teachers, some special education teachers, a principal, all really advocating strongly for this. And sort of highlighting for us that the curriculum that was previously used was really piecemeal and made it very difficult to have equity across our district. I'm wondering if you can just, the one thing because I'm understanding the intervention materials and how those are helpful with our tier 3 students and our special education students. The one area I'm a little bit less clear on is the difference between option A and option B. So with option B, that includes materials, it says for coaches, special education, and multi-language educators. Can you help me just understand what exactly would that mean by school, or are we set, you have to buy a set? Is that like?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. Option A is really just looking at our general education teachers in the classroom. So a second grade teacher receiving the teacher manual and resources in an effort to support more co-planning and co-serving efforts, that there would be a set of benchmark advanced second grade resources for a special education teacher to utilize, a set for our coaches, a set for multi-language teachers. So being able to have kind of a library, they all wouldn't get their own individual, but a library of those additional resources on hand in service of co-planning and co-serving. So now you're looking at wrapping your arms around resources for all educators, not just core classroom teachers, general education teachers. So we can go at that level, right? To do this work, we need to get those resources in the hands of our classroom teachers. But if we want to accomplish our goals related to serving all students and co-planning and co-serving, then we kind of have to move to that next level. And that's kind of how you can see us working our way down through what we're asking and why we're arriving at that highest option.
Okay. So if we were to add a section at a different school, we would have to buy another set of materials for that.
If it was for a
section?
classroom teacher. Yeah, this is based off of projection and numbers for next year and accounting. I think we already accounted though for some additional spaces where we're seeing some numbers and some fluctuation. So trying to be really strategic about where we calculated those funds.
My other request is sort of an equity request as well. I don't know, again, if this will pass, what level it will pass at. But if we are, if part of what is funded tonight is materials by school, I really ask that we strategically distribute those and have an equitable model in mind, so that we're not just saying, well, the 9 elementary schools divided by however much money, but we're really being thoughtful about schools that maybe already have access to a lot of those materials and schools that don't, so that all of our learners can have access to the materials that they need. Thanks.
Mr. Meyer.
Thank you. Dr. Means, I heard from the presentation here that a significant portion of this is funded with grants. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I have a question and then some comments. My question is, please, can you speak to our compliance with our competitive bidding requirements with respect to this recommendation?
Within the presentation that was provided 2 weeks ago, there was thorough analysis of multiple curriculums, and there were several matrices shown and shared with the board and community.
Okay, thank you. So we're confirming that again, and I apologize for my absence
No.
at that meeting, but it's an important question that needs to be repeated, I believe. So my comments are this. We have to support the totality of Dr. Means' programming for the school district. And he can't be nearly optimized on his effectiveness if we pick and choose as a board. So I have to support this. There's funding has been identified. With respect to our budget crisis, and I think it is a crisis, I'm rather dark in my wording in life. And so when I've been in difficulty in life, and in whatever fashion I didn't have resources, I aspired to what I called controlled degradation. That, if I had 5 classes and I didn't have enough time that semester, I didn't want to get 5 Bs. I wanted to get 4 As and a C. I wanted to be excellent at my core course selections. There's nothing more fundamental to what we do as a school district than language arts. We cannot shortchange this. So, we cannot cannibalize our core programs because we have a budget crisis. And so the hazard of dealing with a crisis, a financial crisis, is that silly, this is a terrible word, silly decisions get made. And we can't make silly decisions with our language arts. And certainly no voice on this board has suggested that. I just want to affirm those sentiments. And so we do, to the community, we do desperately need to address our budget needs. I will vote for this tonight. We cannot vote for everything forever. Something has to be done. Do not take comfort in a yes vote tonight. It does not mean there's any less of a need to address our structural problems. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for finding a curriculum that is much more inclusive. And I want to really encourage my colleagues on the board to not piecemeal off the intervention and the support materials, because I do think one of the great challenges that our students with support face is that they are often made aware of their difference. And it's very important. I love the idea that they're going to be learning and integrated, and they're not trying to on their own, or the teachers themselves who do an excellent job right now of trying to connect them are not spending that time. If anything, that might free up time and energy, and I don't even know if it helps save us in savings in any way. But I believe this is the first ELA curriculum we have found and reviewed and voted on since the state became inclusive of learning as reading, particularly someone with dyslexia, for example, as being considered having a special need. Before that, most parents who were raising their children with dyslexia were not getting very many supports, except for where, obviously teachers stepped in and did what they could. So I think it's really significant that we as a district are showing that we're taking the decision in the state very seriously to be inclusive of the learners and the variety of learners around reading, that really many states are far ahead of us on how they teach reading and how they teach ELA. So I think what we win by that extra, I don't like calling it extra, but by that what's been pieced out as an additional cost, I think that down the road it'd be great to see any thoughts you have on how that has actually made us more effective. That might be a metric to think about, making sure that we're tracking how having a comprehensive curriculum is really extending and supporting the learning. So I do thank you for bringing that forward, and I trust that your judgment has been good. I totally agree that we've got to really figure out the budget challenges, but I don't think this is the area in which we should be doing that. I don't think there's enough measurable savings here to lean on this particular decision to be the one that's, like our step towards financial security or whatever it is we're looking for. It doesn't seem like the impact, what we lose by doing that, seems much greater than what we might short-term win. Thank you.
Any comments from the students? Questions?
I just want to say, I think it's really effective to have a strong ELA foundation at an early education, because it will just build off, future skills, and especially for being inclusive, I think it's very important. Yeah, and I see people today, people struggle to read, even in my grades, and I really think it will be beneficial in the long run.
I do have a question. I work at the Wauwatosa Rec Department. I never hear kids come up to me with the current English curriculum saying, I love English. It makes me want to read. Is this going to make them want to read? Is it going to be effective in engaging them to, if it's not effective in engaging them, they're not going to gain the skills? Is this curriculum going to differ in making them want to learn more about English?
That is our hope. So I think you're asking a really great question. And part of our evaluation, right, we didn't just look at resources around the cognitive needs of learning, right? So we know that those are critically important. The skills that students need in order to decode words and be able to access print has to be a priority. But in addition to that, we have to also be thinking about relevancy, opportunities for students to engage in conversation around text, some of those other needs and effective needs that students are looking for when we think about joy and a love for literacy. And so evaluating through both of those lenses was a priority when looking at the curricula. So that is one of our goals and one of our hallmarks of success, surveying students and being able to capture their satisfaction and their desires of literacy will be something we can monitor closely then as well.
I just thank you for asking that. That was beautiful.
And then I do have another quick question. Sorry for interrupting,
No, please.
Mr. President. Is Montessori included in this?
They are not included in this. Part of our program, part of our reviews, our curriculum reviews is also evaluating content and curriculum for core content areas, but also looking at program reviews. And something with having a new principal in our Montessori space is really evaluating what is Montessori's vision for ELA in the context of Montessori. So it's really hard to target a decision around a resource or materials when you're looking at it more from what does our program need. So that needs to happen first before we can make some determinations and decisions around resources for Montessori.
So this is included in all of the elementary schools. And I think if I remember, you mentioned the USTEM program
Yes,
last time. So it's just those ones?
Just those, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm done, Mr. President.
Thank you, ma'am. Again, beautiful question. I had two. One, I know there's a 7-year curriculum cycle. Can you share a little bit about what that cycle is? Because it's not just every 7 years you come in and share, here's a new curriculum we'd like to check out. Can you share for the community what goes on of you get the okay today or not, but I think you will based on what I'm hearing, to move forward with this? What are the steps that we'll take? I know you've talked about the milestones and data that you'll be looking at, but how, can you just, in a couple minutes or less, just talk briefly through, over the next 7 years, how will we assess and evaluate what's working, what's not? Are we helping kids learn this? Is the curriculum working? And then how do we want to tweak it, adjust it, or look in a different direction over the next few years?
Could talk about this all night, so I'll try in a few minutes. Okay, so part of our 7-year curriculum cycle is that it's divided into 4 phases. So the first phase is really auditing the current state. And we come to the board and we present communication around what is the current state as a result. And that auditing typically happens externally. We have an external evaluator. Sometimes as in this situation, right, there's some internal evaluation to say we're in need of something and we're in need of it with some urgency. Then what happens as a result of that auditing and understanding the current state is determining how are we going to develop new programming and new ways of thinking to reach some of the recommendations and the work that need to happen in order to make improvements. So we develop, right? We think about what will be taught, what materials will be used, what will the scope and sequence be, meaning what will be the timeline of learning across the school year, what standards are really critical for students to learn, how might we align common assessments to those different units so that there's cohesiveness from one classroom to the next. And we really are developing programming. The following year leads us into implementation. And what implementation looks like is really implementing what we have made a promise to in our development side of things, right? So it's executing our plan. It's looking at the timeline for professional learning, what needs to go into ensuring that our teachers are ready, that our principals feel prepared to help us monitor, what materials need to be like curated and purchased and passed out. How are we timelining out what we're calling integrity walks and checks? So walking across our schools with varying stakeholders to say, do our classrooms have continuity and cohesiveness, and monitoring trends and patterns across those integrity checks and guess, surveys and just continuation, but really trying to implement our plan that's developed within development. And then we go into our series of monitoring, and monitoring is where we're really looking at what we have laid out to be our plan, and checking in to make sure that that's what's happening, and looking for spaces that we're seeing some needs and changes, right? So I talk a lot about math because I feel like this is the one area in elementary that had a comprehensive curriculum, has some strong universal programming happening, but the tool itself can't just be the silver bullet. So monitoring is critically important because what it allows us to do is look at our data and say, you know what, we're noticing and observing that there are some shortfalls here with this standard. What are we going to do about it? So my example continues to be, this past year, our elementary math curriculum coordinator spent time developing units around fractions. We saw that as a flaw in our current programming, brought in additional fraction units and had teachers trained on how those units were going to unfold. And we saw success and increased success for our students by doing that. So we're looking and targeting really specific action to say that we're observing and noticing some needs in that area, and how are we going to respond to those needs. So that's kind of the cycle across the 7 years, and we monitor for those 3 years, making those revisions and changes. That allows us to be really equipped to cycle back into auditing, evaluating the current state. I feel like there's a lot I could say. I'm trying to give a 1,000-foot view, but I don't know. Did I cover it? Okay.
With this curriculum, you've come forward with the ask for 5 years. And you've talked, we have a 7-year curriculum cycle. At an earlier point in the conversation, 2 weeks ago, you discussed that with ELA, because of this is such a substantial change, there's so much information being adapted to, that we may shorten for this curriculum to a shorter window. I'm curious with the 7-year cycle, those comments, and that you have a 5-year ask. Why not a 7-year ask at this point? I suspect these materials only become more expensive down the road. But can you take me through your thinking on that?
Yeah, I can get us started. We actually did ask for a proposal on the 7 years and 5 years, and the varied cost was not substantial, wasn't much, right? So we did look at the 7 years. I think what you named is exactly it. We want to make sure that we're really closely monitoring because there is so much happening and changing and conversations existing around literacy that to be proactive, to think about what might be the actions that we take now so that we can be responsive in that 5-year cycle versus the continuation of the 7-year cycle was part of our consideration and thinking. I wouldn't say we've landed that that's going to be the case, but I think it helps us in that those first years of truly monitoring, seeing if we're on the right track to what we want to carry out in our plan. And if we don't, how might we need to revisit some more external auditing of the current state? So it's just trying to be really more intentional in this landscape and this environment that is constantly evolving and changing. And that's kind of the goal of shortening it down to the 5-year cycle versus the 7-year.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. The last question I had is, there's been a variety of conversation points from public comment tonight, through several of my colleagues, really kind of centering what is core to our mission. The ELA is one of those things that's core. I'm aware that the curriculum committee frequently centers all conversations around the mission, the vision. We also have the strategic plan that literally our agenda is based off of every meeting. As a board, we have not kind of lived bringing that forward on a consistent basis. We've got our board North Star now behind us. That's an item that we utilize. But I'm kind of curious, if you were to nest this in our mission, our vision, our strategic plan, things that are core to who we are and what we want to do. And I'm going to look to you, Dr. Marble. Could you do that in a minute? Of centering us, and you can go over, I'm not going to time you, but like how does this contribute and move us forward to those North Stars that we have?
I know that you're asking me, but actually I want to pass it off to my friend here who can probably speak to it a lot more eloquently. I will say that in this process, the North Star for developing the selection process was the vision. That is what anchored all of the decision-making processes, whether it be the decision analysis that our team went through to vet the different resources, the NERN tool that our educators went through to vet the resources. The vision is what grounded all of the work.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go as well. And I'll let Brenda chime in here as well, that the vision of really we've articulated the vision as our like final destination, right? When we are arriving at ensuring that an exceptional student experience, eradicating inequity, eliminating disproportionality, exceeding proficiency all, when we are seeing growth around standards for all of our students, that is our measure of success. And it's all of the action that we take, we align it from the very beginning of this review. It was taking what actions will we engage in that ensure that we're marching towards this vision. And so being able to know that's the ideal state and it's the actions we're taking, this is one tiny checkpoint. I think that's something that I want to make really clear too. Coming to you here with the board and asking for, it's a big purchase, it's a big decision. But in our world, it's kind of like, this is the one checkpoint to help us do a lot more work. This is kind of small in the sense of the grand work that has to happen to reach this vision and this measure of success. And so that has been our North Star. I don't know if you feel.
No, I mean, I think all of those things, I think to be really precise about how like this decision supports those things, right? So when we think about exceeding proficiency for all, what we just talked about is we're asking for you to come around our entire system and all of our students. So sometimes when we have conversations about core resources or ELA programming, sometimes unintentionally, intentionally, the system has set to only think of our middle of the road kids. So when we think about exceeding proficiency for all, this drives that commitment to do that. When we think about ensuring an exceptional experience, eradicating inequity, we right now have our teachers who are trying with all of their might to give their students the highest level of education, but our teachers can only do so much. When we adopt this resource, it will tie a cohesive thread and it brings to light and makes explicit the evidence-based practices so that they all have a fair shot at making sure their instruction is as sound as it can be. With that said, it's really explicit, but it's also adaptive in the sense that we still need to hold true to making sure our students have autonomy, agency, and that they see themselves. So there are some curriculums that do a great job of evidence-aligned, research-based practices, but they're really tight in the sense that teachers don't have the autonomy to tweak or think about different engagement strategies. So when we think about why this resource, when we think about our vision, this resource lent itself to being able to honor that vision in the best way possible.
And kids will enjoy reading more.
I mean, I'm really hoping so. Yes, that is a lofty ask. So, I mean, yeah, that is absolutely what we're going for. So.
Any final questions? Thank you all so much. That was a fantastic set of answers to my questions.
Well, you were mentioning the spectrum of learning, and I know we've talked a lot about our students who need the intervention services, our tier 3 in our special education. Have we talked about gifted learners and how this curriculum would be used for them? I don't remember us talking about that a couple weeks ago.
Sure. So it may have come up. I think one of the key pieces to the statements that were just brought up in our implementation, we are really planning about thinking intentionally about how to leverage our talent development team and think about how they are going to come alongside as we start to implement that core resource to ensure that they are speaking to, because yes, the resource has some pieces and I can definitely speak to that. But as we've said before, it's really not always all about the resource, right? It's about the practices and the mindsets that the teachers hold. So in our implementation, we're intentionally calling in our talent development team to come alongside of us and engage in this work with our teachers as well, so they can strategically think about strategies, planning, questions, all of those pieces to support their learning. When it comes to the actual programming itself, there are listed scaffolds, but not only scaffolds to get kids up, but scaffolds to take kids to the next level. Part of the resource also has something that's guaranteed is their inquiry projects. So students are going to be equipped with a fund of knowledge, but then they're going to be asked to go and do something with it. And when we think about concepts like enduring understandings and these essential questions, what it does is it opens students' perspectives to be able to think about relevancy to their world. So when we think about our students who maybe are on that gifted spectrum, by asking them these questions and by having them think big with enduring understandings, it allows them to push themselves, where sometimes with curriculum, when it's just, you will learn this and you will do this, right? This enduring understandings and these essential questions opens the door more for those students to tap into some of those skills that they may not have been able to tap into.
So I want to be clear, because you presented a lot of options for us, and our motion this evening is that we will adopt the curriculum. But I also think we have to have real clarity around this. Can you review for us your recommendation before us tonight? And then I think we may need to amend for clarity purposes, or make an amendment to the original motion.
So our recommendation is option L for the executive summary, with the yearly cost of the $600 per teacher, which is option 2 underneath the classroom library replacements. And then the professional learning with the custom ed professional learning of the $32,000. That's the grant. So just I'm sorry, my apologies. So it is just the 2 highlighted of the executive summary. So option L, and then the yearly cost of option 2.
On page 20.
Thank you.
For my board colleagues, as Dr. Worley said, this is on page 20 of the executive summary that we got on this. Any board discussion or conversation on that item?
I'm just wondering, do we want as a board to say all of this together? Do we want to say yes to the curriculum and then have the discussion? Where are people at? I wouldn't want someone to say no because there's different thinking about the budgetary piece.
Can I make an amended motion?
You may.
Let me pull everything up. It is recommended that the school board approve the K through 5th grade English language arts curriculum adoption materials with option L, which includes option F plus intervention at a cost of $1,781,357, as well as classroom library replacements for a yearly cost of $600 per teacher K through 5 for classroom library materials, with a cost of $87,000 over 4 years at $348,000. And I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Discussion on this item.
I have a question, please, for Dr. Means. I'm sorry I didn't ask to be recognized, but is this everything you want?
Yes.
Okay.
Seeing no other board discussion, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris, Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Binger.
Yes. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Speaking of learning, I believe the board will be doing some learning along with the community. Our next item up is academic performance workshop presentation on instructional clarity.
Oh, never mind. Thanks, Corey. Thank you, everybody. Good evening.
Dr. Marble, before you start, you might want to share your screen.
It's not sharing online.
Oh,
Just hit the share screen option in the Zoom client.
You just fixed.
There we go. We got it now. Thanks.
thank you, Jamie. All right. Thank you as we troubleshoot through that. So good evening again. I'm Nicole Marble, Chief Academic Officer, and I'm here with a wonderful group of educators that are going to be walking us through a quick little lesson around clarity and how that connects with our equity core beliefs. So to my right, I have Ms. Stacy Clem, our Director of Special Education. I have our Director of Diversity and Inclusion, Ms. Shonda Holland, and I have our Director of Instruction, Ms. Leanne Nazy. So thank you in advance for the opportunity to engage with all of you this evening. Last time I was before you was back in September, and I was able to share with the board the work that we have been doing around instruction. In particular, we took a look at the philosophy of instruction, so our why behind instruction. We looked at the non-negotiables for teaching and learning, so the what of instruction. And I introduced you to our key instructional levers, which we call the how of instruction. And in particular, we took a little bit of time to explore the learning environment. And this evening, we'll be exploring the lever of clarity with a little bit greater depth. So our objective for all of you this evening is to continue to build that coherence and capacity of you, the school board, as well as our community around instruction in the Wauwatosa School District. And again, in particular, this evening, we will be anchoring in clarity, and we will also be exploring what we mean by culturally responsive teaching, as that has been something that has been brought up a number of times, and we just want to showcase how that is embedded into the work around our instructional levers. I thought it was important for us to ground ourselves in all of the work around equity that our district has done since 2013. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but you can see that there's been a number of initiatives and trainings that have taken place with our educators, be it our administrative team or our classroom teachers throughout the last decade. And what you see, in italics at the very bottom is what the work that we are currently engaged in that Ms. Holland will speak to momentarily. But I just wanted to take a moment to pause and show all of the trainings and initiatives that have transpired to date in the past decade.
When we discuss culturally responsive teaching, this is a term that was coined by Gloria Ladson-Billing, the foremost expert in culturally responsive teaching. And she identifies three foci when it comes to defining culturally responsive teaching: student learning and academic success, developing students' cultural competence to assist students in developing positive ethnic and social identities, and supporting students' critical consciousness. Last school year, the DEIA advocates worked collaboratively to identify the working definition of culturally responsive teaching as it relates to the Wauwatosa School District. The Director of Diversity and Inclusion, along with the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, reviewed this definition and shared it accordingly with our teams. In an effort to make the definition even more clear, the DEIA committee reviewed the definition this school year and revised it. Here in Wauwatosa, we define culturally responsive teaching as a research-based educational approach in which educators help students make connection between what is being taught and their diverse identities, their communities, and the world as a whole, so that they engage in deep learning and find academic success.
So in addition to what Ms. Holland just shared, as well as the initiatives and trainings that was on the previous slide since 2013, it's clear that Wauwatosa has engaged educators in a lot of training around elements of equity. However, where we need to focus our efforts moving forward is really making sure that we are moving from theory to practice by embedding the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility into our actions. Therefore, this is leading us to access and review our disaggregated data differently and anchor ourselves in culturally responsive teaching practices, simply as our instructional practices.
And then for special education, we're also trying to use our learning that we're doing for DEIA to also focus in on that document that really is our guiding tool for students with disabilities, that IEP, that individual education plan. And we're diving into really understanding what is this learning and what does that mean for clarity around our goal writing, and what are we doing around specially designed instruction? How are we being specific with students so they understand what they need to learn and grow in so that they can be their own advocate and have that self-determination to grow in their skills, so that they can access our education with more rigor.
The graphic displayed explains the connection between the equity core beliefs, instructional levers, professional learning, and how all of these actions work together to eliminate disproportionality. The equity core beliefs reflect our mindsets and guide our professional expectations. They serve as the umbrella, and the instructional levers are the equity core beliefs in action. The instructional levers provide the look-fors to help us see that the equity core beliefs are being implemented. All of these avenues combined will ultimately work towards the elimination of disproportionality. The equity core beliefs that we are currently focusing on at this time are equity core beliefs 7, 8, and 10. The equity framework is a tool that was developed to assist in the implementation of the Wauwatosa School District equity core beliefs. Every building receives monthly professional learning to share strategies and practices to allow educators to demonstrate the equity core beliefs within their daily practice. Equity Core Belief 7 reads, developing a sense of exemplary service, belonging, and inclusion is the center of the district's outreach efforts with all students, families, visitors, and community members. Number 8, ensuring that all schools and classrooms are welcoming environments that fosters understanding and care for every student, family member, and visitor. In short, the diversity that these stakeholders bring to our school community shall be honored and respected. And lastly, 10, educators in the district will always persevere in serving students even when a student lacks the perceived and/or historically acknowledged home guidance, support, academic background, knowledge, fails to exert the expected effort, and/or struggles to consistently adhere to the district's student code of conduct.
The instructional pillar clarity, as defined in the Wauwatosa School District, is that teachers provide clear academic expectations through strategically aligned lessons so that students are empowered to drive their own learning. Important to creating coherence around our work is demonstrating the alignment of the equity core beliefs 7, 8, and 10 to both the teacher performance indicators in standards 1 and 3, as well as the Wauwatosa instructional levers for clarity. The North Star of quality instruction is clearly articulated learning targets for which all other components of the lesson are intentionally planned and aligned. When there's clarity, high expectations are evident for all students, and the learning goals are consistently highlighted throughout the lesson. When educators communicate clear learning targets to students, it provides transparency around what they should know, understand, and be able to do. And as a result, this builds student self-agency. When students have clarity around the learning goals and success criteria, they know exactly where they are and where they need to go to be successful. And they internalize questions that they can answer, such as, what am I marching towards? Do I understand what proficiency and mastery looks like? And what does quality look like with this task? Additionally, students have an increased sense of belonging when they know what is expected of them in their learning spaces. Success criteria and student self-assessment also go hand in hand. Students compare their performance to a known standard, learning target, or set of goals. This evaluation enables students to identify their strengths and weaknesses and helps them chart a path of progress. A student who is able to accurately and effectively self-assess, then revise accordingly, has attained independence as a learner. Equity core belief number 8 ensures that all classrooms are welcoming and promote the diversity that each student brings to their learning environments. Educators use culturally responsive teaching practices to bring equity core belief number 8 to fruition. When educators embrace students' diverse cultural backgrounds, experiences, and identities, and build upon the students' experiences within their lessons, it promotes increased student engagement and creates a positive learning environment for all. Culturally responsive classrooms consider the well-being of students and promote academic success. Teachers help students to see and make connections for sense-making and to understand the relevance of the learning. Students having background knowledge or schema is imperative to making the new learning stick. And finally, equity core belief number 10 communicates that educators consistently provide guidance and support for all students to ensure equitable and supportive educational environments, regardless of their individual abilities. One way in which educators provide guidance and support from a clarity perspective is by making their expert thinking visible. Teachers model what mastery looks like. 2 high leverage strategies that help us to do that are the use of think alouds and exemplars. Sometimes the educator is the example, and other times the teacher uses an exemplar, such as student work samples or mentor texts. And teachers can do a think aloud using exemplars. When teachers do a think aloud, through practice, this thought process transfers to students, increasing their understanding of how to complete required tasks.
So the so what comes with what to do with this information. So for our school board, it's being informed about what the school experience should look like as we continue to march towards that vision of ensuring an exceptional school experience for our students. And to also hold the Wauwatosa staff, not only the 4 of us, but our principals and our educators in the classroom, responsible for ensuring that exceptional student experience. And then for our families and community members that are listening in is to be informed about what the student experience should look like so that they can serve as conversation starters, not only for your students, but also for the educators that serve your students on a daily basis. And so with that, we welcome any questions and conversation. Thank you.
For this one, I want to start with our students. You are the experts at learning. Any questions or reactions?
So from experience, I see all my teachers that I have, they're very inclusive and welcoming, and I think that I see a lot of equity among, or at least for Tosa East. But when we talk about the rigor and the, academic standards of classes and courses, I feel like it's very inconsistent among courses that I take. And I take some challenging courses, but I feel like the standards and the expectations I don't feel like are very high. And I catch myself slacking off a lot. And I know my classmates do too. And I don't know if there's a way to like keep it consistent through all the courses. But yeah, I don't know. I just see a lot of inconsistency among, like the expectations.
Megan, thank you for that. I just want to highlight the need for curriculum adoptions and curriculum developments, because that's exactly what you were describing right there. We need to have common expectations across every single classroom for a similar content area. So thank you for highlighting that. And I also want to just comment that we will be coming back to the board in the coming months to talk more about rigor. So you kind of set the foundation for us to jump off moving forward. So thank you for that.
Kind of furthering that, I got a lot of, like, from this presentation you just gave, it's a lot about holding staff accountable for how their classroom works, right? Basically, that is one thing that suffers a lot at Tosa West is the different standards in each classroom. And I do recognize that each teacher has the right to build their own classroom and do it how they want. But there's certain times where that shouldn't be the case with the phone policy. There are many teachers at West that are very lenient with the phone policy. And as someone who's very distracted, just looking over and seeing like my classmates on their phone when they're talking, I'm like, whoa, what's going on? Did I miss something? Like, whoa. I don't know if there's a way that it can be held accountable for teachers to like enforce certain phone policies. Like, I'm not one who's like advocating for like phone jails, but especially at West, they're like, we have these policies in place. Your phone is out, you get a referral. I've heard teachers go, well, a referral's coming next. And then a referral never comes. And I think that's more of a teacher issue than a board issue. Now I'm thinking about it, so I'm just kind of rambling. But I'm wondering if there's a way that we can have like these basic standards to be held accountable throughout the district. So there's like some base level for students, like obviously, like somewhat kind of like you get my vibe, like what I'm trying to say. That's all.
I think there's something to what you're saying of no matter what policies are in place, if they're not implemented to fidelity, it's like a curriculum. They don't do much good.
Yeah. Perfecto. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. This is why you're Dr. President.
I'm just merely paraphrasing your brilliance. Dr. Willie, we'll start with you, see if you've got anything.
Sure. So I'm thinking about how we take these excellent ideas around culturally responsive teaching and sort of the stepping stones to it, or if we were in the kitchen, the recipe, but understand that you can follow a recipe, but that doesn't make you a chef. So how do we work with our staff to move towards being the chefs of culturally responsive teaching? And then I think the other side of that is how do we know, like obviously from the students, but what's the way that we'll learn that this is having the impact with students? And I'm thinking particularly back to West at the PTA meeting last week. The principal, Mr. Gala, did a good job of continuing the conversation around the challenges of that we know from the data, and data, numbers aren't everything, but we know from at least the numerical data that West is serving particularly well the students who come with strengths, but has a lot of work to do still on serving students who either don't feel like they belong or fit in or don't have the academic strength yet. So I guess it's like, how do we get the chefs, and then how do we, monitor the outcome and really monitor from where I think it's super important, which is the students. Are they being reached? Are they feeling that responsiveness? I'm glad to hear that, we have a student who is hearing that. I'd like to hear over time, the students who maybe don't feel as connected or as much a part of the district. How are we going to find out from them our success level?
I can start. In an effort to really address the students who are not feeling the sense of belonging, who really all students will benefit from culturally responsive teaching. But as we are working through the implementation of the equity framework, we are doing equity walkthroughs. West will actually come up next week. Principal Gala and I had the opportunity to just sit down ahead of time and go through each equity core belief. He was able to self-assess where he felt his school was at and where he needed additional assistance. And at that time, he worked directly with his DEIA advocate and his coaches to try to address some of those areas of deficit. When we complete our walkthrough, we will specifically look at equity core beliefs 7, 8, and 10. Equity core belief 4 actually talks specifically about culturally responsive teaching practices, although we want to see it elevated within every equity core belief. My colleague Leanne and I have worked to align all of the instructional levers completely to the equity core beliefs so that we can see the culturally responsive teaching practices in action. When we complete our walkthrough next week, there are specific guidelines that we will look for to see if these actual strategies and practices that the DEIA advocate has trained the teachers on a monthly basis. In the event that we don't see these practices elevated, that's when we'll go back, and that's how we will create our action steps that will be implemented beginning when students come back in January. And we will continue this practice for the course of the school year until we really see all of the equity core beliefs implemented to fidelity.
Additionally, as Jessica had shared previously, really where some of the instructional best practices and strategies get traction are that just in time for teachers when they have guaranteed and viable curriculum, right? That outlines what those big rocks are in terms of instruction. And so part of the monitoring in that curriculum review cycle is exactly what you are asking. How are our students engaging in the learning, and as teachers plan for instruction, that they're very intentional, right, in designing instruction for all students. And where that planning is supported is through our PACE structure. So when teachers have common planning time, and they can co-plan to co-serve, they're looking at the needs of all of their students. And part of that process is bringing evidence of learning to the table and examining who's got it, who hasn't learned it yet. Right? And then looking at the individuals behind that data to determine how we can best meet the needs of each individual learner. So culturally responsive teaching practices, strategies, and evidence of learning all go hand in hand when given also the right resources that drive the rigor that our students need.
And to add to what my colleagues have already shared, in terms of the professional learning for our educators, we're starting with our building principles. So this school year, we are spending time at every time we pull our building administrators together, unpacking the instructional levers and how they tie to practice, but then also the theory in the equity core beliefs. And so we're really trying to get solid and calibrated as an administrative team before we then start bringing it full scale with our classroom educators, which we have intended for next school year. One other thing, in addition to the equity walkthrough that Ms. Holland was mentioning, is our building principals engage in observations and walkthroughs as well. And one of the items that we put into practice this school year was capturing walkthroughs through the lens of the instructional pillars and being able to monitor that because we keep talking about the student outcomes, but there needs to be some sort of, and you touched on it, Dr. Worley, there needs to be some sort of input to then having these student outcomes. So we need to study what are the instructional practices, where are the strengths, where are areas for continued growth around these instructional pillars in terms of how we're moving student learning forward. So that's something that we're just starting to engage with this school year.
Thank you. That gave me a lot more clarity about how you're synthesizing these different pieces together. I appreciate the responses.
Mr. Meyer, anything?
Yes, I just have a piece of input for your consideration, and I don't know how you factor this in if you choose to. So the input is this. I have a mantra I have is that I really don't know much about very many topics. So for all those topics where I don't know much about it, I find the smart people and I listen to them, the ones who I call the smart people. And that's whoever happens to really know about it. And I had a colleague at work who led the team I was on and tried to mentor me a little bit about my job here on the school board. And the colleague was an African-American gentleman who grew up in the inner city of Chicago. And he told me, Mike, you need to understand that when I was a child, from the moment I opened my eyes in the morning, my first and only thought was, how do I get to school safely? So when I sat down at my chair at the beginning of the class day, I had just lived through that experience. Subsequently to that, a senior supervisor above me, an African-American woman, advising senior management, said, and she felt it appropriate to say this to me as well, that everybody needs to understand that when I sit down at the beginning of the workday, I may have, on my way to work, suffered racism at the gas station on the way in. And I don't start my first moment of work the same way as people who did not experience that, because I'm all wound up inside. I'm all tense. I need to decompress somehow. So both of these people said to me, consider that in whatever you're doing, that you could have a wonderful program for the day, but you have to account somehow for the experiences that those people, your faculty and your students, had as they made their way to the building. And both of these people thought that that would assist in our success. So as I said, listening to what those people who experienced this told me. Thank you.
I want to focus a little bit on our equity core belief number 8. So I'm looking at slide 9. I don't know if it would be helpful to pull it up, but I'll read it. So it says, ensuring that all students in classrooms are welcoming environments that foster understanding and care for every student, family member, and visitor. In short, the diversity that these stakeholders bring to our school community shall be honored and respected. We are in the midst of having some really difficult conversations as a community around our sort of enrollment strategy. We had a couple of parents who came today and were sharing with us how harmful those conversations have been, and that message is making them feel quite unwelcome in our schools and in our community. And I would love to hear a little bit about how we can be thoughtful in addressing that and supporting families who are coming from an open enrollment are coming from open enrollment so that they too can continue to feel welcome in our community and in their schools, and their children can feel like they belong while we continue to go through these conversations.
I think that it's important, regardless of where a child resides, that we hold the same accountability to ourselves to make sure that those parents and families feel welcome. I don't think that, it's really something that we should be looking at in relation to how our education is delivered to our students as to where exactly they are coming from each day, but for us to make sure that we have built those relationships and we understand exactly what each student needs as a building leader that walks through our door, as a classroom, each student that's in our classroom. If we've taken the time to build the relationships and get to know those students as individuals, that's how we should provide their education to them. And if the situation comes up where we do need to discuss how open enrollment will affect us as we move forward, I think it's important to reach out to the Department of People and Family Services to get talking points, to wrap around, to point people in the right directions, to make sure that everyone feels comforted and welcomed regardless of where they reside, what they're bringing to school every day, and making sure that we are just providing the care that we know each student needs to be successful in their classroom environments.
Yeah, I mean, it is something I would like for us to be really thoughtful about. As the task force continues to work through stuff, there's just a lot of, there's data that's being shared that I think it's doing a little bit of it's doing a lot of us versus them. And it is really harmful to families. And I want to just be really thoughtful and considerate in how we talk about this topic.
Dr. Hoig, I appreciate what you just shared. I think it's appropriate. I've been an educator in the Milwaukee metropolitan area for 30 years. That's on top of us having Chapter 220 and open enrollment. In every district I've ever been in, we've always said once a student is accepted in whatever program we're in, they're a student in the district. So I agree with everything you just said. But as a board and as a community, we also have to deal with the duality that we've established a residency financial strategy that is based on accepting non-resident students. So the challenge is, yes, we should be empathetic and we should not allow, and I think there are people who are using the factual data points and they're it's being leveraged to make points. But at the same time, this district has been a forerunner, has been the metropolitan leader in utilizing open enrollment to offset financial costs for this organization. So I think there's a duality of, yes, we have to be empathetic. At the same time, a long time ago, your predecessors established a structure and a model where open enrollment is utilized as a financial model. And so I think reconciling that and talking about that honestly as well is important.
Mm-hmm. Not just predecessor, but this colleague was one of the lead architects of the open enrollment strategy. And it was never racially motivated, either way. But in the community, it was thought that it was. But if in the boardroom, it was a purely financial decision. And people jumped to conclusions about where somebody might live because of the color of their skin. And that's been going on for 2 decades at least. And that's just not a valid way to think. Mm-hmm. And so I truly appreciate everything you're saying. This cannot be them against us.
Right.
As I said in a previous meeting, there's 3 legs to the table. And one of them is finances. And we have to be able to pay the bills. And so that's the only way I look at it. And then try to do that in a compassionate way.
So maybe sometimes I talk in platitudes. So let me be very clear. the district has established a financial model that is built on utilizing non-resident students. So there has been a financial structure that was created years ago in this district to assume and to not to take those students in as a result of our social conscious, but as a financial mechanism to sustain the system. So yes, I agree with everything you said, and we have to be candid and open in saying that has been part of our legacy.
I'm okay with,
Would it be okay? So I know we're agendaed for a conversation about this policy.
Well, I want to be, and I think the last thing I would say to Dr. Hoyt's statement is, and I think with open enrollment, with any non-resident program, because, you know, we have one last student who is part of the Chapter 220 program that will graduate this June. I guess I agree with everything you said. And if we're going to be candid and honest about who we are, part of who we are has been, you just heard Mr. Meyer said, we established ourselves as one of the legs on our three-legged stool is assuming we don't look at those students as students in some cases. We're looking at them as a financial transaction. That is, and that bothers me. But that's part of what we've built our structure on as well.
But may I also please add that it was always also true, and for me, it still is true. Once they are here, they are one of us.
so I think maybe
They are
that's the
ours.
piece that I want us to be really thoughtful of.
Yeah, and
Mr. Meyer,
that's,
yeah.
there's no distinction, differentiation based on your zip code or your street address. All of our students are and should be, they better be treated equally or equitably according to their needs. It's never been a question. I'd even say expulsion hearings over the years, it's a very rare expulsion hearing that it is a non-resident. It is typically a resident student in the expulsion hearing.
Yeah, and I know I appreciate that, and I know we are going to talk about that shortly. And I don't want to get into a debate. I mean, we will talk about that policy, so we can debate it at that point. But I think it's really just more as we're having these conversations, as we're sharing information, to make sure perhaps what we need to be thinking about is differentiating open enrollment as a policy versus children who have come here through open enrollment. And that those are not, they're not the same. There isn't a transaction. It's not like that student brings us that much money and that's what they're worth to us. So I want to be really, really, I think that's what I'm looking for, is just how do we be really thoughtful? Because our families are feeling, we have two parents who came here today who are saying, we don't feel that same sense of belonging as these conversations are happening. I want us to just be really sensitive to that.
I've been shocked in this boardroom about 6-7 months ago. Someone said something during public comment that was shocking in terms of describing non-resident students. Some of the language that is used in our community is blunt. And so I think part of this conversation, the reason why we're having this discussion and we wanted to bring this to you is while there are certain, and I appreciate what you just shared, I hear, and they present it to our principals and our educators, there's other voices that are also part of the narrative that we have to collectively continue to, and so I appreciate the statement that was made earlier this meeting. We have to continue to ground ourselves in strategic goal number 2, to say that we are grounding ourselves in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, that's who we are. Because there are others who pivot and they use language that I have felt like we have stepped backwards in terms of how people talk about children and non-resident programs. And so it is incumbent on the board to ensure that you are delivering a message to all the educators in the organization that we don't look at children that way. And that if there are certain community members who also hold those beliefs, that they at least know from this governing board that that's not how you feel.
Dr. Means, is it fair to say that to this point, that the board arm that has been looking at this, the policy committee, has very much followed the principles that Mr. Meyer has set out. Not what you are describing. I know that there is fallout and in fact, soon, I know, but I'm saying, I just want to be clear.
I'm gonna
I agree.
recenter us now and just this line of conversation. We'll come back to it. We've got an agenda for this and I don't think that.
And I'd hope to set some norms of collaboration before we had that conversation.
For sure.
So I hope we'll come back to it.
Maybe
and start from that.
We're demonstrating that we did agenda a good meeting because we had the overlap of this discussion in your policy discussion on purpose. So this is a good precursor.
Yeah. And I don't want to stop this conversation. I just want to pause it.
It's important
until it pops up on our agenda in about 20 minutes or so. Dr. Hoyk, anything else on instructional clarity? Ms. Hammerall.
Thank you. So I know this year we are putting a lot more responsibility on our principals to act as those instructional leads in the building. And the board has given a lot of resources, in my belief, to the secondary schools to be able to hire deans of students and mental health experts to take that off of the principals' plates. And I'm hoping that the board is going to receive an update on how those principal walkthroughs are going, at least at the semester level. And sort of this presentation is kind of high level still to me. So could you kind of give like a 2-minute explanation on if I'm a principal or if I'm a parent, what do I expect to see in my student's classroom? Or what do I expect my student to come home and tell me their classroom looks like or feels like to meet these goals?
We'll take a stab at that concisely. I do think that we have named that there's some variance across our classrooms, right? So our goal is for that to be a more guaranteed experience for all students. But when we think about a lesson structure, which is the direction that we are moving to really wrap our heads around how we launch a lesson and how students experience the learning, what we mentioned here around clarity is that there are learning targets. So that with learning targets and success criteria, that's how a teacher might start a lesson. And so that students are clear by the end of today's learning, what should I know, understand, and be able to do? With that clarity, the teacher designs, let's say, a learning activity. First of all, they might build some background knowledge, tap into some connections using students' experiences, and really kind of prime the learning for that day. And then the teacher would create an activity, sometimes multiple activities. So we have a lesson structure that's really called launch, work, wrap. And so to kind of conceptualize that, you might repeat that process several times. The teacher launches or sets up the learning with clear expectations, connections, and then the teacher may design a learning activity that students work collaboratively on. Perhaps it should be a combination of students working collaboratively and students working independently, having a combination of both those practice opportunities. The teacher is circulating during that learning process, gathering evidence of student learning and checking for understanding throughout the lesson, and then synthesizing what the students learned for that day and forecasting what's coming next. So it's really like thinking about that there's a structure for the lesson. So that's how a teacher might plan, right? To have those things in mind as priorities. But then where strategies come into play, and you see some of the practices like marked in the levers, those are how we engage students and how we get at the depth of learning and how we drive the rigor. So that's where we would create discourse for students and students being able to make connections and to transfer their learning. And so that might look at both whole group and small group instruction so that students can be hands-on and that some of that is individualized for students to meet their individual needs.
May I say something else? Sure.
So I guess I should have been more specific. How do you, if we're looking at equity core belief 8, how are we ensuring though that same experience is being given and experienced by the students? And in that, are there multiple different people doing the observations in the classroom, understanding that we all have implicit bias? So is it only the principal in that classroom watching that teacher? Or are there multiple perspectives who are giving that teacher feedback?
May I take,
Go.
may I try?
Absolutely.
So each school growth plan has 3 goals. There's an academic goal, there's a disproportionality goal, and there's a school culture and climate goal. If the building principal is truly attending to the equity core beliefs that Ms. Holland referenced earlier, then they should be intertwined with that disproportionality goal. It should also be tied in with the academic goal because, as you've heard, the clarity shouldn't matter if it's for a certain racial group or a certain ethnic group of kids. It should be present for all students. So at the core, if you're asking who is attending to this work on a day-to-day basis, it's the building principal through your school growth plan. So if you are a parent listening to this presentation this evening, if you are unable to sit down with your principal and say, how can you tell me how you are attending to these equity core beliefs? How can you tell me that this is happening in every classroom every day? And they don't respond back with, here's data that we can show you through our school growth plan, then the work is not happening.
Yeah, I think the growth plan is a great snapshot, but that's one goal. Whereas during an instructional period, I would anticipate many things are happening in the classroom. So I agree, that's one measure. But I'm more interested in the day-to-day, making sure that like all of our kids feel like the teacher is giving them the attention that they need and that they are welcome in the class in a variety of ways.
I guess I would just add, and we're focusing in on clarity around the core beliefs. The clarity comes in as to what Ms. Nazy had mentioned. Are students clear on what they should know and be able to do as a result of being in that class on that day? So that's what goes back to the learning target. And typically that will be posted visually for our students in the classroom, but then also our educators, if they are really leveraging the learning targets, that they will have students interact with it. And in some instances, if it's a high functioning classroom where clarity is prevalent, students will also engage in self-assessment on whether or not they are meeting that learning target alongside the success criteria that the teachers have outlined to say, this is how you know you will be successful in meeting this learning target. So I always encourage families to not ask their student when they come home at the end of the day, what did you do today? It's what did you learn? Because if the clarity is really strong around what students are supposed to be learning in math or ELA or science for the day, our students should be able to go home and say, in math, I learned X. In ELA, I learned why. Because when we flip the conversation about the learning and not the doing, that's where we can see the transference and the learning being stuck in the students' heads as well.
100% with what Ms. Marble shared, or Dr. Marble, excuse me. But I also want to reiterate the do part where a parent could see the correlation or guardian would see the correlation is that after asking the student what they learned, if it were to be followed up with what did you do, you should see a correlation that the practice that the student engaged in, right, is in service of or developing that learning target. And so it's about purposeful learning activities and experiences for students to develop those goals.
All right, so when we look at the key instructional levers, right? So in a learning environment, clarity, rigor, access, and engagement, right? These are the things that we're looking to ensure our students have, correct? I'm going to be very straightforward. I was going to say students of color, but time after time, we continue to get data that our Black students are not achieving many of these things. Different data points being low enrollment in accelerated classes, right? So not the rigor. A lower sense of belonging from surveys that we do. A disproportionate number of behavioral referrals. And most recently, significantly lower academic achievement. So when we look at the first quarter of our academic achievement for our students at the secondary level by D's and F's, We know that our district is comprised of 21% Black students, yet they make up almost 50% of all Fs at the secondary level. So it looks good on paper, and we're talking about all this, and we've been talking about this, and we kind of even, we even rooted our strategic plan in this. The district has come to us for teacher raises, which we granted. The district has come to us for resources and curricula to support these students, but how are we going to build the capacity of these teachers, right? I mean, like truly build the capacity of these teachers to meet the needs of our Black students, because we're not, and we haven't. And we continue to not do it. And the data continues to tell us the same story over and over and over again. So there can be, there can be school growth plans, and there can be leaders in the buildings that are telling their teachers that they need to be more culturally responsive, but how do we ensure that it's being practiced and that there's a focus on our Black students? And, you talked about building capacity of the community. I mean, how do we truly build the capacity of the community to align with our mission, vision, and strategic plan? And that elevates our disproportionality of our Black students. And I know that's a big loaded question, but I find myself frustrated because I feel like I weave it into many of my questions that I have for the district. And, this just laid it out exactly what every student in the district should have. And time again, our Black students do not receive the same or even comparable educational experience as their white peers.
I just want to say thank you for elevating that, and it's having these conversations, not only in the boardroom, but also with our building principals, and our building principals having those conversations with staff and not being afraid to call things out. I think a lot of times we're maybe afraid of what are the consequences of me pointing something out to an educator, and we need to get out of our own way and pointing things out when we see it, because we all carry unconscious bias, and we can't do anything until the unconscious becomes conscious. And so we have to be disruptors when we see things in practice, whether that be the director team or the district level team when we're going into buildings, or our principals when they're going into classrooms, or our educators of one another. We've talked a lot about that too, how our educators, when they're in their planning meetings, something will emerge and they will run to the principal to say so-and-so said or did something, or they're running to DEIA advocates. We need to get to a place where people are okay with saying that didn't land right with me within the individual teams that people are on. And that's what's going to help us continue to move things forward and address what you're talking about, Ms. Willis. Until we're at a place where we can not be afraid to interrupt language or interrupt beliefs, we probably won't get to where we need to be. So it's developing our capacity around being okay with having those conversations, because they're hard conversations.
And I think a community member made a great point that we need to consistently root ourselves in our mission and vision, because I don't even know that our teachers know our mission and vision, right? So that message is really being disseminated to everyone, and that students should know our mission and vision. I can imagine that these two probably didn't know it before they joined the school board, and they may not know it now. But if we claim to be this district that wants to be a lighthouse district and wants to ensure an exceptional student experience for all students, then we have to make those significant changes and have those hard conversations.
So in a small way, it starts tonight, because now Dr. Marble and this team in front of you can say that the board, under no circumstance, feels a level of urgency in regards to us serving all of our students. Because candidly, I would say that the level of instructional clarity and rigor that we talked about isn't there for white students, but it's definitely not there for kids of color, specifically Black African-American students. So I think we have work to do for all of our kids, but in particular the students who, as you said, are perpetually in those disproportionality areas. But I think it starts with these four leaders having the ability to say, we went before the board, and under no circumstance do they feel that the current state is acceptable. And I had a conversation earlier this morning with Ms. Holland where I said, at some point we have to transition from talking to action. Because the talk we've talked. I think that one slide that Dr. Marble shared with all the different things we've been doing since 2013, we talk a good game in Wauwatosa. It's an amazingly good game that we talk, where we say we are diverse and we're open to different things, but the experience of the children who attend school here, and candidly the families, is a very different thing. But it's going to require leaders of all different hues to say we're ready to disrupt the system. And until that happens, we're going to continue to see the same data.
So I guess I'll be very explicit. I'm tired of saying, we will welcome, we want to do this. I'm ready to see action being taken. I think teachers and educators and staff have had enough time to digest our strategic plan. They understand what this board wants, but now there's time to take action. If we keep getting results like this for our Black students, if we keep hearing anecdotal stories from our Black families, we need to do something differently. And at the very small level, at the educator, building principal level, we have to do something differently. I mean, it is what we're doing to our Black children. It's just not okay. And so my call to action is that we do something. We do something about it. We stop, we'll continue to support the efforts like we have as a board. We care about making sure our teachers have the resources they need, that they're being compensated fairly, but now we need to hold them to a higher expectation and say, this is what we demand of you because all of our students deserve it.
Have some really specific feedback about how the walkthrough with Mr. Gallo went would be a good piece of information to have eventually. The building walkthroughs, what you learn from them and what you see and where you see possibilities for further levers for change and impressions to make. Not to put him in a particular space, right? I just think he's been very wanting to be part of this, and he's made that clear to parents. And so I think to very specifics, let's get some, not just, mission out, but let's get some good feedback on what was seen and where those points are that we can really make change. But again, as people said tonight, that's still from the building principle piece. We know it's in the plan for next year, but we really have to push to that student piece and what they're seeing and what the feedback is.
You want to go? Okay. At West, I feel like there is a large misconception with teachers and Black students who skip class. That just because a Black student skips class a few times, they automatically don't want to be there and do not want to learn. That is not the case. And I've seen so many of my Black African American peers want to learn, but have skipped class a few times and then be refused by the teacher because you wasted my time. You didn't show up. So why should I teach you what you missed? And I just feel like that is a reason why there are some of those Fs in the 50% of African Americans there in the standings that we have that would not be there if some teachers were more compassionate and realized that, yes, people do skip class to hang out with their friends and it's not what they're supposed to do. But these people are coming here taking accountability for what they missed. They want to learn. And so many times I've seen the learning and the wanting denied from my peers because they've skipped class one time or a few times. And it's disheartening because I've seen other students who are white who have skipped class, stayed out past their open campus hours, and they'll get taught what they missed. But it's not the same for my African American peers.
I was just gonna say, your reference to the data is also something that we need to keep top of mind. We now have access to it where we did not before. So we now have access where we can always be looking at the data of our Ds and Fs, and that we weren't able to disaggregate data before, but now we can. So we can't hide and say we're working hard, we're doing better. We now have data to say, you may be, but the data is not showing it. So what can we do differently? So bringing the data to the forefront, I think, is helpful for you to always do to us and us to always be bringing that to.
And I think something happened in Wauwatosa. And I think what happened was also is as we became more diverse from a racial perspective, the language became more about we can't compete with certain districts. And I just refuse to believe. I refuse to believe it. I refuse to believe just because we have about 40% of our kids are kids of color and 60% or 59% of our students are Caucasian, that we can't compete with the highest achieving districts in the metro area. But there was a message, and I see some of my colleagues shaking their heads in affirmative. There was a message that we started to deliver within the organization prior to our arrival where we said, well, maybe that's not who we are. And that's where I've always grounded myself in saying we can be a lighthouse district. There's nothing stopping us from competing with the very best school districts in the state of Wisconsin and demonstrate that our kids of color are just as strong. But it is going to require us disrupting the system and having really tough conversations that actually your willingness to talk about this publicly, you have no idea how much this is going to help these leaders now have the discussions at the principal level and the teacher level to ensure that this is the same discussion that is continued.
I just think it's unfortunate that I have to say this in public because it's in our strategic plan. I mean, this should have been a conversation that was happening a year and a half ago when we adopted the strategic plan. There's nothing new. There's nothing that has changed in our mission, our vision, our strategic plan. This should have been conversations that were happening a long time ago.
So Dr. Marble, we have been having the conversations. What happens when those conversations happen?
You teed that up perfectly. You must be like reading my mind right now. What happens is there's a lot of excuse making. And we need to interrupt the excuse making. And we have some building principals that are newer to the organization that are interrupting the excuse making where that maybe hasn't been happening in the past.
And what happens to those principals when they are engaging in that interruption or that disruption of the system? What happens to those principals? Let's just be, so Ms. Willis has called it out and calling it a thing. What happens to the life of those principals?
It becomes miserable.
In what way?
Because they are interrupting language beliefs of the educators that are excuse making. And then there are complaints about the building principals that then are made. And then the building principals feel like they need to backtrack in order to maintain homeostasis in the building. So.
And I don't think that, I'm an educator. Teachers know what they know and they have their own lived experiences and their own perspective. But I feel like we've given ample time for teachers to kind of build their capacity to work towards our mission and vision. And maybe we haven't done it directly enough at the building level. But what I'm charging you with is to do that. Next year, if we have teachers who still aren't able to build the capacity to educate all of our students, then maybe they don't need to be a part of this district. I don't want to just kick anyone out, but if they can't align their teaching practices with what we're telling you as a board we want, with what the community has expressed that they want, then maybe they're not the right fit for Wauwatosa School District.
And I will just say that you saying that right now helps, because the one thing I keep hearing from our building principals is, will you be supportive of me when I have these difficult conversations with my staff members? My response has always been emphatically, yes, you have my support. Knowing that it sounds as if I have your support in supporting building principals and having those conversations.
Not as a board, but you have my support. And I think I've tried to make this clear time after time. And now I'm just going to be very straightforward and explicit that something has to change.
So we have instructional coaches who are trying to have these conversations. So that's why we have instructional coaches now, because they're trying to have these conversations and they face significant pushback. They report to Leanne and she can speak to it. I think there's a lot of conversations that we have in this boardroom. This is by far the most important we've ever had. And during my tenure, this is the most important because I think there's this aspiration or this goal that we espouse to as a school system, but we're not putting the work in. And it's hard. Let me say that as well. What we're asking people to do is it is the most difficult job in the metro area because we have such a unique blend of students and their needs, but it has to be grounded in instructional clarity for every student. Because again, I want to state that I don't think we're doing a great job for all of our students. So I think of white students who are not getting the true instructional clarity. But to your point, Ms. Willis, to bring us back to your point, but when we can't continue to admire the data, we can't continue to admire the DISPRO data and say, boy, look at that data. At some point, there has to be action.
And you mentioned last year to Madison parents how this national trend or understanding, or you talked about and maybe you could just, I don't want to take a long time, but the idea that and that's a school that is majority minority, that when you get a certain amount of Black students in a school, expectations change.
There's a term that's been used in academia that it talks about the soft bigotry of low expectations, where when you see the demographics of a school, or in this case a school district shift, then our talk of how we achieve and what we want to be changes. And then I think what Mr. Gall has been referencing, and I think you can see it in both of our high schools and middle schools, you see how the students travel. So literally, we have students who are all entering the same schoolhouse door, but they're having a very different academic experience. So when I start looking at the demographic breakdown of the students who are in advanced placement courses or who are in our STEM track, that is the demographics are not representative of our overall district, but those are the dirty secrets that we don't talk about. We just don't talk about those things because, again, to talk about data or budget, we haven't invested enough to make sure that we even provide gifted and talented program for white students. So what happens is that once the students get into the secondary level, they're able to separate themselves, segregate. I'll use the word segregate themselves. And when you look at our data, that's what's happening. That I can walk into an advanced placement course and it looks different than the majority of, I see our students shaking their heads. It just looks different. And so, yes, I think this is pivotal. This is a pivotal moment. And I know, Mr. Meyer, you have a statement, but I want to say thank you to the board for having the conversation. Mr. Meyer.
So I'll go back to, I'm trying to listen to the smart people, and you're all smart people, this is for sure. So, but there's another smart person I listen to, and I'm into doing tangible things. And we had years of equity coaches, and it wasn't working out. And Dr. Means had said that we were measuring outcomes. We tried, it was sincere. We need to do things that were effective. Well, after years of equity coaches, this is anecdotal now, but I have every reason to believe it's accurate. There was a long-term sub brought into one of our high schools to an English class. And the long-term sub on arrival decided that the sub would go off curriculum with a book assignment. And the book assignment was the biography of Malcolm X. Why was that off curriculum? Why wasn't that already on the reading list? Okay. And there's one of those tangible things. And then as you speak to expectations, all but one of the kids in the class were interested, but one wasn't. And the teacher said very directly, teachers get fired for teaching this book. I expect you to pay attention. And the student, okay, I'll pay attention. And it worked. So expectations, but are we doing all of those things? Are there more things we could do to have the materials that speak to the children? That's my question here. If there's somebody who's getting hoity-toity about what, and I don't blame them, they have how they were trained, whatever, but the book that somebody who's in our disproportionality population, their interesting book might be different from somebody else. And we need to like break the mold and bring in some stuff that they are interested in that speak to them. Maybe we are, but I know in that case we weren't. After years of and millions of dollars spent on equity coaches, that book was not on the reading list. Or that book and nor similar books, for example. Okay, so those tangible things we need to do to speak to the children.
So I'm gonna try to wrap us up by saying what the purpose of us bringing this forward tonight. And I'm sorry.
I just want to say one more
Yeah,
thing.
please.
Ms. Murray, I appreciate that you want tangible things, but we can't add things like a book about a Black person. We need to disrupt the systems, like STEM, for instance, that perpetuate the inequities that we have in our district. And that's a hard ask because it's going to make some people really uncomfortable because they feel really good that they can insulate their kids from the rest of the population.
Okay,
But
I'm trying to help and you're sounding rather dismissive of what I said. So
I'm agreeing with you that we need.
there's more
tangible
stuff.
items.
I agree. We
But we
need to do more. I'm right there with you.
Bigger
We need-
things to
we need
disrupt the
to
system.
break some paradigms and reach children. I'm fully agreeing with you.
So I think what if I may, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think the whole purpose of this presentation was to demonstrate that we don't think that there's a magic wand. We don't think that there's some magic. Dr. Marble and I talked about this presentation a couple of weeks ago. There's no magic training that's going to then click and then have someone say, now I will teach with equity and instructional clarity. There has to be a belief that every child can achieve at the highest level. And I think what you're hearing tonight is that your leaders are telling you that they're not seeing that in every building. I think what you're hearing is that when principals are trying to disrupt the system, they're facing very quiet disruptions and upheaval in their individual buildings. Mr. Meyer can attest to the fact when I was here 20 years ago, Wauwatosa was always among the top 5 districts in the metro area. That was just who we were. And so what bothers me is when I hear the language of, well, we're a little different now. That is being resigned to defeat and not assuming that all of our children can rise to the highest level possible. But what you heard this evening is that the only way that happens is if we have a level of instructional clarity and we continue to coach up all of our staff, starting with our principals on down. I think we have the structure in place. What I'm taking away from this conversation tonight, I want to use a normal collaboration, if I may paraphrase, is that I'm hearing you say, get on with it. Stop talking. We expect you to do more. And I think what I'm hearing both of you say, both Mr. Meyer and Ms. Willis, what I'm hearing you say in terms of putting things on the table is that make this a priority.
And the STEM at Underwood was placed there intentionally to reach the population at Underwood, which is, it needs.
Are you aware of what the STEM looks like at Underwood now?
No, I'm sure I don't.
It's very segregated.
It needs to be made to work for the people it was intended to serve. And if it is segregated, that was not why it was put there.
It's
not
extremely segregated.
Well, then that's something where we need to deal with that.
And we're doing a STEM audit right now. So I just want to put that out there that we're coming back with that.
And I don't want to lose this piece because I don't want this conversation to end without me saying it. And I believe we have the right teaching staff to do this work. I think the people we have right now can do this work. It's really hard. It's really hard. And I think that's why you're not seeing this nationally. I think we have the right structure at this point with the 14 instructional coaches we have in place. That's why you have the people that you have in front of you. The structure we have in place has been constructed to allow this work to happen. So when I listened to the teachers, our team has listened to the teachers when they said, well, we think we can do this work if we have lower class sizes. Okay. Then let's get them lower class sizes. They said we need to have rich instructional materials. Okay, let's get you rich instructional materials. I think Ms. Willis, you said it best. Everything that our staff has asked, we haven't said no. We haven't said no to anything. but there's a strategy behind that. And the strategy behind it is if you say you need to have a behavioral specialist, okay. Let's get you let's get you whatever you say you need. So then once you have everything you need, now let's focus on your instructional clarity. And are you doing that work? So that's been people have asked the question. I think it ties into what we're going to discuss in a few minutes of, yes, the per pupil dollar amount may have increased over the last few years, but it's been done in the name of, if we want to be the lighthouse district that the board has said we want to be, what I want to do is equip our teachers with everything that they need. And I think we have. I think from compensation to instructional materials to support, you name it. I think we've established it. Now it's, as you said, it's time to get results.
Thank you all very much for your time. It was a really rich conversation. I'm going to take a 10-minute recess before we head into the governance section. Dr. Willie and I need to convene over kind of how to navigate the policy section. So we have a couple agenda items that we'll get to first, and then we'll go to policy. I do want to ask before we go, is there a hard stop this evening that we'd like to commit to?
Yes. Yes.
I think we need to commit to a time.
Shall we say
9:30.
Yes, that is.
Okay. So we will wrap at 9:30 this evening. And if we are done earlier, that would be delightful. But we'll take a 10-minute break right now. And then we'll come back. Thank you all very much. Amy, we're back. Jamie sleep.
Oh, no, he never sleeps.
No, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, see. So
Are you actually up in the ceiling? I often wonder.
I'm omnipresent, Dr. Banga. So you never know where I am.
I know.
There.
I know. It keeps me on my toes. We are now on number 5, board governance. We've got 2 agenda items, and then we're going to tackle policy. I want to do a quick reset. We're going to have a hard stop in 59 minutes. So contemplate we get to where we get to. The plan for policy, I will explain really briefly where we're going to go, or I'll ask Dr. Worley actually to explain where we're going to go and how we're going to tackle the policies when we get there.
And I'm sending Jamie an email right now. I'm sending you an email, Jamie. May I ask just a clarifying question? Just because I know we have folks in the audience who are here for specifically 5113. Is that something that we're going to talk about first?
It will be not quite first, but what we have first will take no more than 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
We're aware of that.
Okay.
That's
Do we, so a question from my colleagues on the board. Do we want to table board engagement session summary and main takeaways, or can we do that within 10 minutes?
I can do it shorter.
Name that. Okay.
I was gonna say we can shorten.
Ms. Heimer-Rolland, if you can do that in 3 minutes,
Definitely can.
that would be delightful.
That one thing is
I'm here.
after she gets her 3 minutes.
We had our first board engagement session last month. It was attended by about 60 community members. So I think that was a really strong attendance for our first session. Our next one, just so it's on everybody's calendar, will be January 31st, which also is my birthday. Plan accordingly.
Bring a present and a cupcake for Liz.
Bring some cookies. Exactly. So we basically asked the community 3 main questions about facilities. We asked about how we can better use our facilities to advance student growth, how we can use our current buildings to generate revenue if enrollment decreases, and what, if any, facilities are missing in our district. So try to get kind of like a holistic view about how community members see our facilities, and try to move away from sort of what the focus has been with the task force. So a lot of similar answers for question 1, focusing on student growth in the facilities. A lot of comments focused on ADA accessibility, upgrading science and math labs, adding sensory labs to the buildings. Somebody specifically said that they wanted a dark room for photography at West. And a lot of people said better lighting at West. So I don't spend a lot of time at that school, but that was a pretty shared concern with the attendees. How can they generate revenue? A lot of repurposing of Fisher, adding daycare, renting out the facilities to rec departments, and spaces to include all citizens, not just those who necessarily are part of the school district. And then for facilities that are missing, we had Performance Arts Center, sports facility, and community centers. So a lot of people talked about using solar panels and also including health clinics or OT, PT clinics that we could also generate revenue through. We tried to make the session really engaging and have a lot of back and forth between the board members and the community. I think most of the feedback I received was very positive. So I hope that means that our community will continue to come to these sessions. I know I learned a lot from just the different people who came from, most of the schools I would say were probably at least one person to represent their school. So thank you to all the members of our community who did join us. And Lynn will talk about what was created for those who could not be there in person.
15 seconds.
I just strongly encourage, it's there as viewable still for all of you. There are some similar themes to what was brainstormed, which I think is really great that people had a chance. She had 3 minutes. I need a couple minutes. That people had a chance to put their ideas up. Even though they couldn't be there that evening, this was open until actually this morning, because when I went on to close it yesterday, there was still someone on there working. And it had gone out in the newsletters, at least the West newsletter was just over the weekend, so on Friday. So I wanted to leave time for people to go in. I would encourage going in and looking. We will pull off as well, I think, and add it to the other data that we have. Very similar. A lot of facilities things are about comfort, air, light, accessibility is another huge piece that came up in this. And though it's different on the online, we also, because people couldn't express this in the room, couldn't hear the emotions, we made a space for hopes and fears. And also an open brainstorming space, questions for the architects, which we had the architects, they're all meeting. Those who were there knew that. And I just really encourage you to go on and look at this. And it was, we think a pretty good strategy for getting some asynchronous participation without it pulling, hybrid meetings are great, but they can be problematic. We plan to do another version of this, a different setup, because the facilitation for this January 31st one will be a little bit different. So we've got some other models we can use off of Mural, and we plan to do that again. But please give us feedback on how it could be better.
I'll just add that the January 31st session is going to focus on academics, and Dr. Marvel was helping us plan for that already today.
And culture and rigor.
Outstanding. Thank you both. I'm going to move us right into subject B, action to approve the attendance of board members of the Wisconsin State Education Association Convention in January 2024. Dr. Worley.
Would you mind sharing who is planning on attending?
I will. And attendees planning to go are Dr. Hoig, Ms. Willis, Dr. Joseph Anger, and Ms. Hammer-Brown.
I would love to go, but it's a big week for me because of classes starting the next week. I got
me to read it?
just one. It's recommended that the school board approve the attendance of board members at the Wisconsin State Education Convention in January 2024, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second on this item?
Second.
Thank you. Any board discussion on this item? Mr. Meyer.
Just a quick comment. This is obviously to me a very good value for the money and a very good thing to do. As we all know, we are in unusual financial times, and as we approach referendum, likely people will be microscoping down on board expenses. So I know everybody's responsible. I've over the years not claimed expenses for these things. I'm not saying other people shouldn't, but just please know we need to look like we are tone sensitive. And I know you'll do that, but just so it's said. So thank you.
Dr. Joseph Anger, can I just share, because I attended last year, just the invaluable information and knowledge that I received from this convention, especially wrapping our head around potentially a referendum, like really gaining a clear understanding of the state budget, the financial impact that is being seen across the state. So I'm really glad that several of my board colleagues are joining me, because I think it's just a really fantastic opportunity for us to learn and grow together as a district. I mean, there are just so many insightful people there and just across the state. I mean, just to kind of see what's going on in other people's districts, I think is so enlightening and helpful. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity.
I will be checking in with each of the board members who are planning on attending, if this is approved, to see if anybody wants to serve as our delegate to the assembly as well. And that's a role. I'll have Dr. Means reach out to everyone who's planning on to attend, if you'd like to or would be willing to serve as a delegate. I believe it's the afternoon on Wednesday. So you will learn a great deal about policy and issues going on throughout the state. You have less opportunity to go to some other open sessions. So there's a pro and a con there.
It was also really fun to see Sharon in that role last year. I got to observe it from afar, but it is a really interesting and neat experience.
Any additional board comment or questions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris, Dr. Hoyt,
Yes.
Ms. Willis,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Emerald Rowland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. Congratulations and enjoy your attendance. We are going to our plan around policy this evening.
Next one.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we like to do, we have given we're gonna first go to two groupings of policies that, again, these are all first reads, including when we get to 5113. Our ebb and flow or cadence for the policy committee is that we bring a proposal, you give us some feedback. If you have it, then we bring it back to a second meeting, at which point there is a vote. There is no action tonight on any of these policies. But we have a piece of paper that we've handed to you while they're setting up. We're just going to go ahead and get two groups done. We want to do group one, which are policies in the 800 series and that have basically everything in them is about updating them for legal compliance. What I was hoping to do with group one and group two are the only ones we're going to do. We'll put off the others further down the list for next time, is to ask if you had, as you went through them, any of these that you actually did want to discuss, or are you okay with the whole group and say, bring it back to us next time. So if you have any comments on the ones that have legal compliance, rather than sorting through one number after one number after one number, on this sheet of paper, I have the policy numbers 8146, 8210, 8310, 8320, 8320.01. That list, they're all about updating ourselves to legal compliance. If there's any that you had questions about, yes, Jenny.
I have two. Okay, so 8146. Okay, what did I even mean by this? I wrote notes, but I don't have it pulled up in front of me. My note is, as everybody else pulls it up, what law is this policy born from and what is the purpose? So that helps anybody else.
Yeah, I'm just opening it to it. 8146.
Oh, yes, that we have to like post and tell people.
Oh, yes, this is new. And we talked about this. That is a state law.
So this is a new law.
Yes. Yes, it's a state law that we don't have a policy for. And we did have some discussion. I remember which one. We did have some discussion about this one. It responds to a class 1 lawsuit that, right, Dr. Means, did you want to say anything else? There was a lawsuit. We have to do this now. And the only good news is that now we don't have to post everything outside on the door. We can put it on the website, but yeah.
Okay.
So yes, we do.
Yes, I appreciate that we have to follow the law. Can I just say, for any lawmakers who might be listening, it's really insane that you took all of our money away and now you're making us advertise choice schools.
So funded mandate.
So
Yes, you
very
can take
good.
that can go next. This one can
Any
go next to
lawmakers?
the advocacy committee. If you would like. Yes.
My other question was on 8310. We have in there that we do not or have not been historically charging a fee for public records to cover the cost of time and materials. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but does the city ask for
I don't know.
a charge? Because I would like for us to be in alignment. I do think, broadly speaking, that it costs us time and money. And again, as we've all recognized here, we're in a situation where we have to account for all of every dollar we spend. And so I would like for us to consider that.
Any other guidance on that one?
I would concur to be consistent with what the city's doing. My other question on this for the policy committee to consider is some districts post what all requests have been in the response. publicly on a website. And I'd be curious if the policy committee wanted to, if not for this update, for a future update, consider pros and cons of that.
Yeah.
There are several school districts, as I've looked at this policy, who, when someone makes a public records request, post the individual, the requester, what the request was and the response to that request. And I'd love to talk about what the, I don't know the pros and cons of that, but it's a possible issue of transparency.
There's guidance on wisconsin.gov that there are at least some municipalities that do charge for open records. I would be comfortable taking this one off and discussing it at a different meeting. Is that what we're gonna do if there's?
No, what I'm gathering, we're just doing it right here. If anyone has something that you want to send back before the second read for us to research or find out more about. For one thing, we can try to find out what other districts do. I mean, I think the cost piece is obviously also an equity question of who then can afford that. So
This is just for public records requests though, right? This is not for like a student.
no, these are
Family
just
asking for
public.
their record.
No. This is public records requests.
The only other request I had for this one is that there was an item related to Wisconsin Public School District related records, GRS, expiring May 23rd and so on, that we just, once this policy is in place, that the board receive a copy of this on an annual basis. So it's like, it refers to it in the policy, and I just think it's important that the board be
Aware of our records keeping rules. And just so everyone knows, everything else is crossed out below that is all covered in the paragraph below. So we don't need all those specifics anymore, just in case. It gets confusing when you look at these because some of the crossed out things are options that we could add in and some of them are things that we have right now. Okay, I've written those two down. Is there anything else in group one?
I've done very little research, but a few Google searches. It does not appear that the city of Wauwatosa charges a fee for a public record request. As of my very little research, aka clicking on like 5 links.
We can find that out.
Yeah.
We don't need to,
Just so you know.
Okay, so
moving on to group two. These are in a group because they are new policies, as some of you may be aware or not. There has been there's been a lot of policies for the last couple of policy committees to take care of because there wasn't a lot of attention for a while or upkeep, or we didn't have the resources that we now have in using the help of Neola. But these are ones that are on the list because we don't have them. And so we don't have an alignment with what is recommended by Neola's common practice among school boards. And in some cases, it's also Wisconsin statutes. So are there any of these that you would like us to investigate the wording on further? Yes, Jenny. Thanks for doing your homework, Jenny. Stellar, A+.
all right. Okay, 8141. So this is around staff misconduct. There's this line in there that says staff alleged to have committed such misconduct shall be reassigned or placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of a misconduct investigation. But the misconduct, if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to pull this one up, is pretty egregious misconduct that it's referring to. I want to be really careful that we are not just reassigning that if a person needs to be placed on administrative leave, we're not just reassigning them to another building to get them out of one building to another. I think we've seen some of those things happen in other settings, and I don't want to do that. Sorry, I'm looking for this one still. I would give you the exact line, but I don't think I wrote it down. Oh, staff alleged to have committed such this is at the bottom.
The
Yeah,
last paragraph
Yep.
above, just above reporting requirements.
yep, exactly.
So, what would you like to see? Because to me, I read this as a similar policy to, I would say, not necessarily innocent until proven guilty, but the opportunity to be fully reviewed before, because it's alleged at that point. You have suggestions?
Can they be can we say something? I don't know if we want to get this granular, but what about reassigned to non-student facing role, a non-student facing role, or
If a staff member is placed on administrative leave, they're not placed in front of students.
right? No, but it says staff
Shall be
elect-
reassigned.
Yeah, shall
or
be reassigned. Yeah. So I'm mostly concerned about the shall be reassigned piece of this policy rather than the administrative leave, because then obviously those are they're not going to be around our students. I just don't want somebody to be alleged of some kind of sexual misconduct and then we just move them to a different building, which I realize I would hope we would never do, but I'd like it to be cemented in policy.
It's also a bit odd that this policy is in the 8,000s when the rest of our personnel policies are in the 3,000s.
I think the main component of this policy is around the reporting aspect to DPI, and that's when working with our Neola expert, he referenced the fact that there are statutory mandates that require us to report things to DPI. But to get to your individual concern, if there is a staff member under investigation, we don't place them in front of students. If after the investigation deems that they are not guilty, a reassignment may occur.
Of course.
Mhm.
So can we put that? Can we just say that? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I have one more and then, okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
My other one in this pile is 8395. Okay, let me find that one. Mr. Pinion, a couple of questions for you on this.
I'm gonna suggest we actually pull this off because I think if we're gonna deep dive into these, I would rather give us ample time for you to be able to do that, Dr. Hoig. I worry at this point, we've got about 38 minutes left and I'm gonna stop us right at 9:30. Would folks be amenable to tabling the rest of these? Not tabling.
Don't table them. Don't
That
table
we
them.
will
Don't
be-
table.
We'll pick these up at our next meeting. I just don't know how long we're gonna.
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Or at least can we move to,
We can pull up
Would-
8395. Do we want to pull
Would
off
move
any
to
other?
the open, the open.
can we
enrollment
just
policy.
move to 51?
That's next. That's what he's asking. And I'm okay with that.
And then if we have time, go back to this, I'm assuming we won't, and then we'll make that motion at the end. So right now, we'll just move straight to 5113.
Yes.
Just shift the conversation and then we'll see if we have time.
I just don't wanna.
Yeah.
That's fine. So, as we move into 5113, I want to make clear that, again, this is a first read. I also want to just really give a sense of what has transpired in this process, in that the document you have as 5113 from the policy committee is something that we worked on almost a couple months ago now. And then we put it on pause because we also knew that the 2075 task force was talking about this. And during that time period, we got a whole lot more data. So we have a couple of friendly amendments, most likely. Well, we have one for sure, and then possibly one, or at least some content for the board to discuss. What was put forward, I know, like, you're asking for this, but the policy committee opted, and plus we didn't have all our members at a extra meeting last week, so we couldn't make any action. But I wanted you to know that what you had in your agenda to look at is not in the same places where the policy committee itself is. So we figured this is a good time to have a discussion.
Can you provide perspective? Because Jenny and I were on the policy committee and we just approved this policy less than a year ago with Neola's recommendations as to why it was brought up a couple months ago.
Oh, well, I think because, yeah, we will. Mr. Pinion, this was part of one of the requests coming out of his office. And I think as they give their presentation, you'll see why. But I want to just emphasize that a lot of this conversation is around making sure that how we're doing this 5113 is equitable and systematic, that there's policy and then there's number setting, there's preference for schools and guarantees. There's a few things that just really need to be sorted out to make sure that as we talk about then our decisions about open enrollment numbers in January, that we understand how that then operates within the policy. And there are some things that his expertise has brought to the surface that I don't think you all probably had last year. And that for that reason, our committee has felt that there need to be some potential revisions.
Well said. Are we free to jump into this? All right, we will try to be as concise as possible while doing our due diligence to make sure you understand what we've learned in the last 8 weeks diving deep into this. I'm here joined, of course, with my colleagues, Mr. Brightman and Mrs. Zelazoski, and we've also brought our legal counsel, Mrs. Renee Aldana, who's been really helpful in helping guide not only in this area, but in multiple areas as we move through policy work in other areas within all of our divisions. Don't need to really hit on this first slide. This is DPI's information about what is open enrollment, who can apply, when, and can applications be denied. Again, we're going to skim over some of just the general information. This is here to be thorough and for the community as well that might want to learn more at varying degrees of entry points of their knowledge. We have listed the statute that talks about permissible criteria that can be used when it comes to space calculations for open enrollment. One thing we stress with the task force is open enrollment is not an option for districts. Everyone has to have a policy and you can't opt out of open enrollment. It comes down to the formula components and how you apply that formula when moving forward. I do believe, and by the end of this presentation, you'll see why there were some issues with the current policy that are not very defensible or could be considered arbitrary when we're looking at how we apply it. So we'd like to rectify those, but then that also opens up the door for a more informed decision when it comes to what does that formula and the application of it in policy look like at the end of the day when we're talking about our actual numbers. 3 decision points will really kind of be focused on for the board tonight, or not tonight, but in January when this is a second read for action. One is about how the policy is written around class sizes. We're going to dive into each of these a little bit deeper. Another one is running the formula on a school by school versus a district-wide analysis. And then lastly is the law around currently attending and sibling preferences. There's 2 pieces there.
Thank you, Luke. As we learned from Mrs. Aldana related to defensible open enrollment practices across the state, there were a couple things that stood out in terms of the practices that we want to make sure we're utilizing. The first, from a human resources perspective, was that we want to make sure that we have a theory of action to our class sizes outside of our policy 5113. That we, from an organizational perspective, want to have a guide in terms of what we want class sizes to look like across the organization and not just for the purposes of non-resident students. So what you see on this slide are what I have proposed that I'll be using as part of our staffing process for the 2024-25 school year and beyond. What you see are class size ranges by grade level groups. These are indicative of our current class sizes, with also a consideration from a fiscal perspective, what is efficient from an organization standpoint. So when I look at rolling up our enrollment, I've created a guide for me that looks at the assumptions that we're using, as well as then how we're applying these class size ranges. And we'll talk a little bit more about how they're applied later on.
I'd like to add, this is one area, our current policy 5113 dictates a maximum of 18, 20, and 23. The concern there is it's a bit arbitrary. So had there been an appeal this year, those class sizes exist only in policy 5113. They really don't exist anywhere else, and they're not codified in any other kind of staffing plan. So it's a bit disingenuous in our current policy to call out these numbers and these maximums that don't have any bearing in real life and practice. So we're trying to align and be very genuine and say, this is where we're living. So then these are the ranges we should be applying when it comes to the formula, and not the ones that are in the current policy. The same will be true for our special education caseload ranges. You'll see on the left side, sort of the ranges that we use when it comes to teacher and student within caseloads, as well as when we factor aides into the equation as well, the ranges that we're working with. So we will apply that consistently as well. There's also ample guidance out there from the Department of Public Instruction. I believe there's an FAQ with over 130, maybe even more questions. We pulled 2 out that relate to this. They don't require you to use class size limits, but they give you a range and they say, you know, you can use projections, you can use class size ranges, and different pieces that might help you as a district. It just has to be defensible, reasonable, and not arbitrary. And then you'll see 85%. This is a range, and the DPI, you know, they kind of don't like to see this number dip too far below 85%, but this is really the reality. And you'll see the formula is very complex when Sarah gets to that point of the presentation. But this essentially serves many purposes. One, it allows room for the reality that people will move to TOSA throughout the year. So if we're running our projections for open enrollment solely on maximums or at 100%, there won't be room, and it'll force even more splitting of sections when people move in. It also is more likely to be upheld by the DPI when there's an appeal pushed forward to the state. Parents have 30 days upon a denial to ask for that appeal. And it reduces the likelihood of creating new sections throughout the school year and gives preference as well to resident students when transfers are needed across buildings for different unique and extenuating circumstances, and may also help work toward the continued smaller class sizes that has been valued in this district historically. I want to talk a little bit about currently attending and sibling preferences. This is something that is required by law. And this is an area where we find the past practice for likely decades has not matched what your policy is as a Board of Education. So I want to be really honest and transparent about what we've unearthed in this process of digging into open enrollment. Our current board policy 5113 speaks to the law that currently attending students, which may also be known as students who tuition waivered this year, are given a preference alongside siblings or those who have a sibling who are applying for open enrollment for the following year. That's a law that is required. That preference means when the board opens up said open enrollment seats, that currently attending students and those who have a sibling are the first to be pulled for those open enrollment seats. That is how our policy currently reads. Another decision point the board could make is to make that a guarantee. That is truly how the district has been operating, is as if it was written as a guarantee, meaning even if the school board opened 0 open enrollment seats, we get on average 73 tuition waivers a year. That is creating 73 open enrollment seats when they finish out that tuition waiver. So if you're following my train here, is like we've been creating on average 73 additional open enrollment seats beyond what has been approved in front of the board. Yet the policy reads as the preference, which means they should be pulled first from those that were approved.
Could you just, for the community listening, distinguish what a tuition waiver student would be and an open enrollment student?
Yep. So a tuition waiver means you lived in Wauwatosa this year, and the state has a very clear matrix that kind of helps us guide the decision. But depending on the date of the move, you would apply for either a current year waiver, meaning you get to stay in that district and it's kind of an agreement between where you moved and the district that's in your new boundaries. You get to finish that year out under that tuition waiver, and it's a financial exchange between the two districts. If you move at a certain point later in the year or moved out of TOSA, then it might be an additional year. So the matrix is really helpful that the state releases every year. It's aligned to new dates so they can help us decide, is it a current year, is it an additional year? And then the following year, you would be applying for open enrollment. Again, our practice has not matched the policy, and we're not here to say one way is better or worse, but just to call out what we've observed and noticed in the differences. But the board has leeway to say, yep, keep it as it always has been. It's been a preference. That is what's required by law, or make it a guarantee as we've been practicing as a system. I don't have an explanation for why that has been. I think because we wanted to do right, it would be my hypothesis by families that have been with us, but that will be a decision point.
So to clarify, for example, last year, the board approved
74.
50?
Coincidentally, they approved a similar number of our average number of tuition waivers. It was 73 or 74.
Right, 74 seats, and then we added 70 some to that from the tuition
For
waiver.
those that decided to stay, yeah, they've been guaranteed a
Right.
space.
So just to understand the procedure. So when we approve open enrollment seats, we're not including tuition waiver in that. And we can't, but tuition waiver gets preference over non-resident students who are not tuition waiver. Like that's the law.
That's the law.
Policy says that those tuition waiver students could be filling the open enrollment seats that we approved, but we haven't been doing that.
And that tuition waiver is for, as I've understood it, 1 year. And then after that year, depending on where it starts, then what? Then
There's two types, a current year and an additional year. It depends on the date of the move.
But after
That, then you're supposed to apply to open enrollment.
and you're just like everybody else.
You have preference.
You have
If there's a
preference.
seat available.
And we haven't had a policy, so we have not, you're saying, had a policy that says guarantee, but in practice, we have been.
Correct.
Because we've been adding those
I
seats
get,
on.
I get, yeah, I get it. So.
Is that just, sorry, I don't want to interrupt. So just so I'm also understanding, so that is, we're talking about not students who came in through open enrollment as like a SK student.
They established residency here.
So we're just talking about tuition waiver. This is the only piece of this that we're talking about right now, or
Correct.
whether we are guaranteeing students who are doing a tuition waiver year, a spot the next year. Okay, just. Okay.
Right, and they get that tuition waiver by being residents for 2 semesters.
So theoretically, last year when we approved the number 74, let's say that the board their understanding was we just wanted 74 open enrollment seats, period. We wouldn't have taken we would have taken one non-resident student that wasn't tuition waiver.
Not necessarily. So the way that the approval happened for this year, last January, was very much school by school application, which we're going to get to in a minute here. There's a different way to do that. It is a district-wide application that gives a little bit more flexibility, but I'm trying to understand your question.
Ms. Willis, I think another way you can say it is that while the board every January has identified a number of seats that you're going to make available for open enrollment students, what we've done is then we've accepted on average an additional 73 additional open enrollment students.
So how do we know the number of tuition waiver before we set a number for open enrollment? Like, I feel like
You won't. I mean, you'll know the ones that have moved and filled out the paperwork. We also have a lot of families that, are busy or don't get us the paperwork for a long period of time, or a year or more have gone by and didn't update addresses. So we're getting those delayed. This is where the state comes in their matrix that helps guide us. But in theory, it's a hard guarantee. Unless the board, we've been practicing as a guarantee. So we've been practicing as it doesn't matter what has been opened or what has not been opened. You are automatically rolled up and you are automatically in. That's how we've been practicing. If we were to be following the policy as it is written as a preference, we would have said, you get your current year, you finish that year or your additional year. And then you are back into the pool of whatever was open.
Yeah.
So depending on where the grade levels were open and where they weren't, and that's how I think a lot of districts, and Mrs. Aldana might have perspective from neighboring districts, but from my understanding, a lot of districts follow the law and give the preference and not a guarantee because it is hard to predict and it might cause splitting of sections and things like that. But it really depends on where the values are of the board and how that factors into the overall picture when we get through kind of some of the other pieces.
Just for historical context. Now, there has been a belief on the board that parents game things, which is why it wasn't a guarantee. Now, whether that's reality or urban legend, I don't know. Do parents really game it or not? And then, even if they did game it, is there financial impact to it? Well, I don't know that either. So, but I do think if we're going to say we're going to start to change, we're going to guarantee or whatever, we need to understand whether in fact parents do game it and in fact whether it has financial impact.
I would not say this in any broad generalization, but I can guarantee you, I've been here a year and a half and I've had numerous cases of residency falsification that I've had to look into for people trying to get or deceive to be here in our district.
So parents are not that people are dishonest, but it's.
It's
real
happened
life is
several
that
times
people are
throughout the year,
by
numerous times,
enough
and I
that you
get
have to
calls
worry about it.
regularly about it, yes.
These are great questions. I'm going to encourage us to keep moving so that you get the whole picture because it's a system. These are interrelated parts. You need the whole picture.
And this is linked to the tuition matrix I spoke to and to the number of average as well as the statute behind it. This is the very complex formula, and Mrs. Elizowski will walk us through.
Thank you, Mr. Pinion. So I prefaced our earlier review of the class size ranges by saying that we need to go ahead and consistently apply for the purposes of staffing our class size ranges and the formulas. Mrs. Aldana helped us put together a formula that again is defensible should there be any appeals, and also is authentic as far as sharing with our community and those around us how we actually identify what seats are available. So if you'll bear with me to walk through the formula. So in the top right-hand corner, we start with a grade level or thank you, left. Righty, tighty, lefty, loose. We start with the grade level or core content area. For our JK through 5th grade, we use a grade level to identify seats. When it comes to the secondary areas, we can look at one of the core content areas. And so we typically used English as the area that we're looking at to identify if we have seats. So the first thing we start with once we identify the area we're looking at is what our enrollment projection is. Again, on the staffing assumptions page that I put together, JK is least predictable. And so we've defined a little bit of the criteria, how we're going to identify what that enrollment projection is. Same with SK, it's a little bit more predictable, but still not the same as rolling 2nd grade to 3rd grade, et cetera. So we're going to start with that enrollment projection. This year's group of 2nd grade students rolling to next year's 3rd grade. We're then going to divide by within that range, somewhere within that low or the high class range, the class size that we're going to go with. And then that formula gives us the number of sections that we're going to have at that grade level or at that content area. We're then going to carry that class size, again, the number that we pull from that range forward and multiply it by the number of sections that we've just identified. And that mathematical equation is going to give us our grade capacity. We're going to move the grade capacity forward and multiply it by the 85% that Luke mentioned in terms of what is defensible of the state as far as open enrollment spots. And that multiplication of the grade capacity times 85% is going to give us our open enrollment capacity. We then take that open enrollment capacity number and subtract the enrollment projection that we have, and that number is going to give us open enrollment seats. If the number is less than 1, then there are 0 open enrollment seats. If it's greater than 1, that defines the number of seats that we'll have. So we can go ahead and take a look at it in use. So this is a fictitious example. We have 350 students that we're projecting for next year's 3rd grade. We've identified that we are going to have 20 as the class size number that we're using. And so when we divide the enrollment projection 350 by a class size of 20 and then round up because we can't have partial students or partial sections, we're going to have 18 sections of 3rd grade. So we're going to take the 20 as the class size, multiply by 18 as the number of sections, and that gives us a grade capacity of 360. We take the 360, multiply it by the 85% to give us our open enrollment capacity. Then we take the open enrollment capacity, subtract the enrollment projection, and that's going to give us the number of seats available. This is a district-wide application of this formula. So this takes all of our 3rd grades across every one of our schools. So the next example we're going to look at is a school-based application of this formula, and you're going to get a sense of of what that difference is. And we know in the district, we've been taking a very school-based application of the formula in the past. So again, this is a fictitious example. We've got 3rd grade at Eisenhower. Our enrollment projection is 46. We know our class size is 20. That gives us 3 sections. We take our class size of 20 multiplied by 3 sections, gives us a grade capacity of 60. The grade capacity of 60 multiplied by the 85% open enrollment gives us the open enrollment capacity of 51. The open enrollment capacity of 51 subtract the projection at 46 gives us 5 open enrollment seats. So you see how the district-wide application allows you to even out some of those building level discrepancies.
So is this, we would have 5 at Eisenhower in this situation?
Fictitiously,
And the other one is
0.
0 for across all schools.
That's one of the reasons Luke mentioned this also makes space for inter-district transfers.
So
I think it'll make more sense as we complete the pieces of the puzzle moving forward here.
So we've applied the formula using the minimum class size range, the maximum class size range, and then a range in the middle to give you an idea of what the application looks like, both at the building as well as district levels. So we're going to start with the district application of the minimum class size. So you can see JK through 12. You can see this, and these are actual enrollment projections. You can see that what the projected enrollment is. You can see the minimum class size from the ranges that we looked at. Again, we're applying the formula in the background. This version is in for summary. It's not quite showing you all of the work, but you can see how the number of sections, when you multiply by the class size, gives you a grade capacity and an open enrollment capacity, and then your open enrollment seats. When we apply the minimum class size with the district formula, we have 0 open enrollment seats in the district. So this is also the minimum class size, and this is applied by school, and this is the snapshot of the elementary. So again, just in summary purposes, you get to see a little bit less of the detail, but you can see when we apply this by building and you are not able to even out some of the variations, this is going to open up 4 open enrollment seats at Madison, and those are coming in SK. And this is also going to open up 5 open enrollment seats at Underwood, 4 in grade 1 and 1 in grade 2, for a total of 9 open enrollment seats when you apply the minimum formula to schools. When you apply it to the secondary level, there still are no open enrollment seats. When we go ahead and apply the maximum formula or the maximum class size to the district formula or application, again, this is the summary of the work. You see what the grade capacity is at each level, what the open enrollment capacity is. Again, that's 85% of the grade capacity. And you see this opens up 129 seats across the grade levels.
Is this including tuition waiver?
This does not include tuition
Why is
waiver.
this number so different than last year?
So it's just different enrollment. So the class size ranges are different because we're actually using the 85% and the defensible formula that Ms. Saldana has shared with us. And our enrollments are different. Yeah, yes, there's variation.
It's the same formula from last year.
We've been using school-based formula.
So tell me about this formula from last year.
This is school-based.
The formula from last year used what I would say was a minimum class size at 100% of the open enrollment seats.
Say that one more
I
time.
missed that.
Yep. So the formula that we used last year had a building level application, and it used a minimum without that 85% factor.
And that was 18, 20, and 23 were the different ranges that policy spelled out, which again, it can be problematic. If there's an appeal, they'd say, where'd those numbers come from? Oh, they just live in this policy. That's a bit arbitrary.
100% was before the 73 tuition waiver.
Was the 85%, why were we not using 85% in the past? Because that's the law, that's.
So there were a number of pieces of the policy that were not being applied as they were written.
But we don't have to use 85%, right? We could use 90%.
It's just gotta be greater than 85.
We just have to have a number. I mean, that's what protects us. It's having a reasonable number.
And just based on previous DPI decisions and discussions with DPI, we have a sense that they would be uncomfortable with lower than 85%.
But we have the discretion to use.
It's a decision point, and you have
anywhere from 85 comfortably to 100%.
When you're at the maximum, and I think those doctors will mention this, it can take you to create a new classroom. Because you can't say no once you said that.
Do you have any idea if we applied the formula we used last year, 100% of the minimum? Right, because that's what you said we did last year. Do you know what that number would be district-wide?
I did not apply that.
I'm just curious if it would be like,
I ran so many scenarios. That was not one of them.
Okay.
I'm really good with this formula now, just so you know.
I do like the idea of 100% of the minimum because we're staying within.
That would make me nervous.
Zeros.
Still
have
flexibility between now and start.
Right.
Could we change the range? Like
You should explain.
but it would be 100% of the minimum, so you could still go,
so we get
because you still have.
But the ranges, so the range, just looking at the class size band is not that significant. When you're going by 85 or even 90%, you're getting more wiggle room. We get a lot of move-ins throughout the year into the summer. And part of, I believe, the position that Mrs. Zalazowski has been in is after these movements have happened or intra-district transfers, there's a timeline for those in the spring for different circumstances. I lean into policy to approve those. I do fear if we do not give a big enough buffer or a big enough window, we're going to force more split sections again when people move in or when transfers come in before move-ins. So the timelines don't all align.
And also know that I believe in all of our buildings, the principals are utilizing the rooms that they have. And when you split, you have to put a class in a room and likely that principal is using it for something else. And the parents have gotten used to it. And now they're going to lose their special whatever room for something, which is fair. So
I think we have
So-
underutilized rooms across the district.
yeah, well, there's implications to all of this stuff, and I know we listen, but we really need to listen to what the
Yes,
administrators.
if we may finish, there's more information yet you haven't received yet. I'd like you to get the whole picture before we start getting deep into the what ifs and all the different, there, like Dr. Willie said, there are a lot of interconnected components.
One point of information, like free to provide, you don't have to provide it now, but can you, just to give me a concrete example, can you give us our projections from last year and then what the actual enrollment numbers were?
We ran that information. Last year, our projection was for 51 more students than we actually had. And so we were 51 students short from the projection, which is a variance of less than 1%. So what you see on this slide is, again, the maximum application of the formula at the building level for elementary. So we had 129 seats in the district by applying the maximum based on district-wide. When you apply it at the building level for the elementary, you open up 221 seats.
So this is not 85% of the maximum. This is
85%
All of these formulas use 85%. And when we did look at districts' policies around us, they were all also 85%, at least the ones that I pulled.
So then when you go ahead and apply open enrollment using a number between the minimum and the maximum, again, using 85% for open enrollment capacity, this would open up 34 seats. And then when you apply it then at the school level, it opens up 136 seats. Again, this is just a middle number in the formula.
so 85, maybe like 85% of the optimal. Or I don't know if optimal is right.
Yeah, it's just a middle number.
85% of the middle number. Okay.
Of a middle number, yeah. And you can see back on this page, you can see the middle number that was chosen. So like where you see that class size, that was the middle number for illustrative purposes.
Just to clarify too, the policy said before we edited that we would use maximum. But we weren't.
And it defined what the actual maximums are.
Right. I just made it clear that so even though we might have used minimums, the policy last year said maximums.
Yep.
So that's part of what we're trying to straighten out. Yeah, you can see it's aligned. Yeah.
No, I believe it. I don't understand why. Because we went through this whole policy and defined it and
But you used minimums last year for the formula?
We used what was called out in policy, which was 18, 20, and 23. Whether it said minimum or maximum is a moot point because they called out the numbers.
It was the number.
So you
That
did
is where
follow-
the problem-
you follow the policy. You're asking.
Not
to
with
switch
tuition
the policy.
waiver currently.
Yes.
And mentioned earlier, the feature of that was that they were numbers that were selected and lived only in the policy, but nowhere in reality. So the question then is, would the board be comfortable moving to reality because the legal standard is that you don't want to be arbitrary and you don't want to be unreasonable. So if you just choose numbers and put them in the policy, that's of concern versus if you look at the reality of class size ranges and choose somewhere along that range that reflects reality, then it's less likely to be arbitrary or unreasonable because it's reality, it's genuine, and it's real. It's just a question of where you want to land.
I just have a couple.
Are you, wait,
Not-
we need to, we're not gonna have any time for questions tonight. We've got 6 minutes.
Okay, well, we're supposed to vote on this and like.
We're not gonna
6
vote,
weeks.
we're not gonna vote on it at our next meeting.
No, but we
Oh, we're
have to make
not.
a-
We're not gonna be ready to vote on this at the next meeting. I will say I will not be ready to vote on this at the next meeting, so you've got 6 minutes.
Set up a process for you to submit your questions to.
Yeah. I'm far from being ready to vote on this in 6 weeks.
I mean, we have a legal responsibility to create a number in January. Like,
What's our
based on
I
the
would
law.
suggest that we get all the information that they prepared. We'll create a process for, like we did with the curriculum pieces for facts and pulling as much as we can, and then we'll reassess what we can manage. There are different things we need to potentially change or fix, or we could do in this policy. We could decide to do 2 of them and not the third one. But we really need you to have the whole picture of what they put together and all the work that they put in.
So this slide shares with you just an overview of what the options are that we've outlined this evening. So district-wide and school-wide, minimum, mid, and maximum. And then also a touch point related to tuition waiver and how currently enrolled students, currently attending students, and how we move forward.
Switch, please.
Yeah.
All right, and then the financial context. So as you know, we've been with task force since I think August. We've been talking through this topic with them. And so we've looked at open enrollment from every angle I think that you can imagine. We've looked at it from a quantitative standpoint and trying to keep it a fact-based, data-driven financial analysis with it. So really there's 4 kind of buckets that we've looked at. The first one is, and I'll say this, don't shoot the messenger first, but Wauwatosa is an outlier. We are by far the largest recipient of open enrollment students into the system. And so if this was a silver financial bullet, every district would be trying to replicate what we're doing, but it just isn't the way we look at it. The second one is based on our costing, we net approximately the $2.6 million, but that's extremely low on the return side. And so, and the financial analysis has some caveats to it that I'll describe in a little more detail. Our current level of open enrollment drives at least $8.7 million in costs. And that's comparable to the $9.3 million that we're projecting next year for a shortfall position. So there's a lot more costs associated with this program with our participation level than you would expect. And then our per student costs are $13,964, which is significantly higher than the $8,700 that we get for open enrollment. So we're subsidizing that average cost per student with a lower per student amount from open enrollment. And I'll get into that too and how that factors in with the resident counts also. So we have 1,096 open enrollment in students this year, and that's about 17% of our student population. I can tell you my past life, I worked for a district and there were 7-8%, and that was far too high for their boarding community at that time. I think St. Francis School District has a larger percentage, but a lower number of students. And then you'll see larger counts with virtual programs across the state, where it's a charter school set up for just a virtual type of structure, where the cost per student is under that $8,700. And that's the business model that those districts have created with that. But otherwise, you'll not see the amount of non-resident students that we currently have. Here in Wauwatosa, we average costs of $13,964. I believe that's on this slide. Under both of the boys standing there. We get that by taking our general fund costs of just under $96 million and dividing that by the number of students that we educate. So that gives us the average cost. And then we receive that $8,700 per open enrollment student. And we've equated that to the per pupil resident amount we get on revenue limits of that $11,019. So they're both per pupil amounts. We've gotten some feedback from the community that we should be comparing total cost with total revenues. If you want to look at it from that vantage point, we have about $12,900 in average revenues per student, which would equate again lower than the 13,964. So no matter how you look at it, we're not keeping pace with the cost structures that we have in place. And that number is important because we nearly have 20% or 1 in 5 students in our system is non-resident. So it's significant for us, and it very much impacts the cost structures. Whichever you want to look at it, we get less revenue, and that's where we set our cost structure. That's true for both the resident and non-resident students. We've talked a lot about that in our spring ramp up for the budget process, and the funding for public education is just not keeping pace with the cost structures. And we've done some things, as you can see on the right side of this slide. You know, we did the 12% educator salary increase. We've invested in facility maintenance. We have elementary Spanish and music. Many districts don't have that. We have small class size, collaboration time, and we added some student-facing support services last year, which helps drive up that average cost per student, but that was all intentional.
We are at 9:30 board.
Can I just
2 minutes?
get through the presentation?
Yeah,
and then we
I
don't
think we
have
should let them,
2 slides left.
they put their time in on this presentation and we do need them.
And I'm fine with that. My job is to hold
Yeah.
us accountable
I
to
understand.
what the board has.
I'd like to propose that we let them finish the presentation, but no questions from the board. Everyone else is agreed.
I'd like that too.
Or end it longer. But at the very least, have them.
That would be my preference as well.
Can I just understand what is the deadline for when we need to know your formula?
We'll speak to the deadline as soon as Mr. Bright.
Because I just need to make sure we have time to, at some
I'll
point,
be
ask
here
the
to speak to that
questions.
at the end. And I'll fast track my comments a little bit more than I was doing. So on this next slide, we look at what we're calling essentially a base case financial model that we did for modeling the financial impact of open enrollment here in our system. We receive about $11 million in gross revenue, we're calling it. So that's the per student amount times the number of non-resident students we have in the system. We identified $8.7 million in costs, and that includes 13 sections that we identified at the elementary level that we would not have a need for if we did not have open enrollment students. So that accounts for about a third of that. And then the secondary level, we have a range from 16 to 24% of our students are non-residents. And so if you take the staffing costs for those schools times those prorated amounts, and then back off that a little bit because you want to be a little conservative, that gets us a total between elementary and secondary of the $8.7 million in total costs. So that would suggest on the front end that we have about a $2.5 million net financial position within that program. And that's true, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And so I'll kind of dive deeper into what that means. So the $2.6 million, when you look at it from more of a business perspective, and I know we don't like to think of schools and children and programs as business-like entities, but that equates to about 23% of our costs. And so that means that 77% of the costs are being not covered by the open enrollment revenue, right? So we're adding to our cost structures by the amount that we staff within that, by that.
Mr. President, I'm not following. I don't
either.
Sure. That might help. Just trying to explain the 2.5.
Yeah, so if you look at it from that standpoint, so the 23% is when you take into the net financial position of open enrollment for us, it's about a 23% return on what we do, meaning 77% of those costs are not subsidized, or we're subsidizing those as part of our overall budget, which is a negative impact on the budget side.
I still understand. Can you explain to me?
I'm sorry, I don't understand it either.
I don't understand.
Because we're talking about a net revenue of 2.5 million,
Yes.
but then we're saying that
Does it relate to how many classes we have to open up if we put ourselves in a position of?
So there's that, and we have a $9.3 million shortfall for next year, and 8.7 of that is due to the open enrollment costs on this prior slide.
$8.7 million
Yes.
of the shortfall is because of the way we utilize.
Because we have a current cost structure that's not reimbursed by the open enrollment revenue.
so 9 million of almost our whole, I don't understand that. This is why we can't okay.
So we've used a number of analogies as we've been talking. And when I say number, I really mean like it's a large number of analogies. So the best way for me to think about it is that as an organization, in order for us to go ahead and make the $2.5 million, we had to spend 8.7 first. And so what we had to spend in order to get those students in the district is 3 times the income that we got as a result of it.
I'm curious what we're going to cut.
What do you mean?
Can we extend this or have a special meeting? I don't understand. I have so many questions. I want to honor that we wanted to stop at 9:30, but I'm just
Take a
finding
special
myself
meeting.
more frustrated because I have lots of questions that aren't going to get
We're
answered.
trying to bridge months of work of the task force and financial analysis into a few minutes. And so
No, I wouldn't say that. I think Ms. Willis has articulated a frustration that candidly you should feel. This is a very complicated concept. And as I stated earlier, as we were discussing, Dr. Hoy, the way we have structured open enrollment in Wauwatosa is very unique to other districts. And we would be doing you a disservice as a board if we continue. I feel like we're rushing. And this is complicated. So I would suggest if there's time that we find the time between now. I think you asked a question. So when do you have to make a decision? So here's the issue. By the second board meeting in January, you must have a number of open enrollment seats established for the 24-25 school year.
Can we say the financial pieces are complicated and just let them do the last couple pieces? Is that okay? I know we all want to go home, but you don't have the whole picture yet.
That's the last slide, though.
if we're going to come revisit this, we can do, I think, a better job of kind of ramping up on the financial side and give more of the backstory and where we land where we
If you feel good about it.
So to be fair, and from my MBA program, like 3 years of courses, these concepts are some of the hardest things to understand conceptually. And there's very few people who are kind of innately wired to get it. And it's not that everybody else is dumb. It's like there's just a very narrow specialty thinking that goes into understanding this. And you're talking massive spreadsheets and tipping points. And think about, you have to be an economist to understand this. How many of us are economists? So it's going to take, you shouldn't feel bad if you don't get it because very few people do. I can get it conceptually, but I'm trying to keep up with them here myself. So it's hard. It's going to take some time to really understand it. I'm sure he can explain it conceptually, but even me tonight, I'm struggling to keep up with how fast he's going.
And when we move in, I would like to know 2 things I'm going to request. One is a pro forma for the next 7 years of what our financials will look like, current model in each of these proposed models, the financials. So does our deficit grow? Does it shrink? I want to know how we cut 13 sections for next year. So talk me through, because I get theoretically if students are all pulled, but I really want to know, before I vote yes on anything, I want to know how are we going to implement? So I want to know brass tacks exactly how we're going to implement.
You need an end state and then a bridging strategy.
That's a great way to put it.
Take
Yes.
years.
The base case is
Because we don't want to leave people in the wilderness who have
Exactly.
committed their open enrollment kids to us. It's going to take a few years, I don't know how many, to get to where whatever we decide we want to go to, it's going to take a few years and it's going to, that in itself.
And I need the financial modeling for every year until we're at that state. So if it's not 7
Dr.
years,
Jessup,
12,
I know that we have to wrap up, but if I could just provide this snippet. The way that open enrollment was initially created, when you take a student, this pie chart should be 100%. It should be, that orange part should be 100%. It's 23% in Wauwatosa. So you asked the question, what are you going to cut? What will you cut?
keep in mind that there's a deficit for both open enrollment students and resident students. So it goes back to the other graphic that Mr. Brightman showed. So it's not an issue of cutting the 13 sections. It's an issue of there is a shortfall in the district, and we are in essence exacerbating it because the way that open enrollment was constructed, there should be a pie chart that says 100% for every student you take, not 23%. That at the core, and I'm not an economist, but at the core, that's the financial challenge that we have in Wauwatosa. The last thing I would state is when Mr. Pinion was in Waukesha, when I was in my other districts, when we took an open enrollment student, the pie chart was 100% orange. That's not the model that you have in Wauwatosa. And so I think that's what's this. So in essence, open enrollment is creating a spiral effect of as we continue to take students, it's just perpetuating and creating more of a financial challenge.
And that's
to the district.
intention with our ethics and our goals.
Yes,
Which
and
is
so
where we
to
need
that,
to
to that
sort
end,
through
Dr. Worley, and so if the organization feels that way, then we should just say that we want to pay for that model.
I just don't understand. Okay.
Can I move to adjourn actually, because we're now 10 minutes over?
I want to let them finish up.
Okay, then no more comments from the board, right? Okay, great. Go ahead, thank you.
Well, I think that's what we have for the financial side. Yeah, those are all the pieces.
I move to adjourn, please.
Do we need to do anything with the policies we did?
No, we'll just bring them back. Some of them it will be, I mean, we're gonna have to, we weren't able to set an additional meeting in December. We tried. We weren't able to set an additional meeting. I'm more worried that we get this figured out. The one, among other things, we're putting Mr. Pinion and his office in a very awkward, not just awkward, almost challenging space to be able, because when the complaints come in about how things are carried forward, they're coming into him. But we all need time to digest this. So we're gonna have to have another meeting to just even look at this one.
We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
So we're not going to decide what we're going to do next.
I will work on setting an additional special board meeting.
And I think we'll come up with ways to ask questions too. So you get information you need.
So Dr. Worley, is it fair? I mean, I think you still have a motion on the floor, but I think what I hear, I want to just paraphrase what I hear you saying, that the 8,000 series policies can be delayed. But at the core, we need to.
We took care of the legal compliance ones tonight, and thank you for doing that.
Yes.
Those are the ones that worried me the most.
But I hear you saying that there's a level of urgency just to be in compliance with DPI for 5113. Is that accurate, counsel?
Very accurate.
Yeah, okay. And that decision needs to be made by the second meeting in January. So however you fit the
The
time.
number decision, the policy has to be.
decision, which then drives our seat.
Is the current policy not, if we were to be sued by DP or by a student or whatever, this was cleared by Neola.
Should we continue to use Neola if they're not ensuring our policies are legally compliant?
Neola provides a variety of options to districts, and districts can choose within the Neola structure what they each would like
I
to
don't think
do.
we created anything.
But Neola doesn't provide the formula. Is that accurate?
That's
Renee?
Right, those numbers are not provided by Neola. That was determined.
So
by-
every district, they still create the formula side of it.
But we were never told that it might put us in legal peril.
That's true.
One part of the issue though is that correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've been doing this for a while. So the numbers, right? I mean, it's
Right.
because you're going to continue, if you want to keep the same people who are already in, we've been doing this for a while, so that it has spiraled.
So what I will do, I will ask that all board members direct all questions that they have in writing or during ongoing meetings with Dr. Means. I'm going to schedule at minimum one additional board meeting. There must be a special board meeting on this topic in January. I'll work with Dr. Means and Summers to schedule that between now and then. My understanding is that we need to have a decision made that at minimum changes to ensure that we are compliant with all legal issues. And so amongst the options that we have, a variety of different choices. I would also be curious if you could provide an option that would allow us to I would like to be able to follow all laws. And if we can't have within the next month, the values-based conversation and come to conclusion on that we don't change our values of how we're currently operating, but we align the policy with law. Does that make sense?
Might not be possible.
I don't understand that statement.
I think we're having two different conversations here. Is one, do we divest from open enrollment and what values do we have around that? Two, what policy do we have in place that aligns with that value? What I heard tonight is we have a third issue, which is our current policy is not meet the muster of DPI.
And anyone suggests divesting open enrollment, the law, as was stated.
No, there's been no suggestion of divesting from.
Wrong statement. That definitely is not what we're putting out.
You mean minimize, not divest.
When I look at the outcome of the decision, where we're taking no students.
Right. And I know what you're saying. You're not saying legally divest, but you're saying the outcome will be.
But there's well, if I may, but there's a motto that says that you can take the maximum district-wide, I believe.
Yeah.
And there's still 129 new students you would take.
Yes.
So that's not divesting because we know that we have 132 students graduating from the district. That would keep us flat.
Right.
So I would say that there's no suggestion to divide,
So you're providing multiple pathways.
There's multiple pathways.
But correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, what you're saying though is how do we get into legal compliance without making as minimal of changes as we can to our overall strategy? Because this is a much bigger conversation.
Until we know what until we have this, my view is until I have a full understanding of what our strategy is and how this aligns with other key decisions being made, I want the plan to be in place and then our open enrollment policy to align with that plan.
It's in the numbers. That's all. There's a way to do that in what is in the slideshow.
But
America's
I don't want to, I don't want to.
Financial costs.
I don't want to circumvent your conversation, but if you want to stay status quo, then there's a pathway. And the status quo pathway is to take district-wide maximum, because that would keep us status quo. That would keep the same number of students virtually than you have right now.
But that's a decision toward a path. You're saying we need to be legal compliance in January and we need a strategic direction.
That's a different conversation.
I don't know if we're going to get there by the end of January.
But
The
what we
complexity
do,
of that is the finances.
but what we do in January,
Third one. It's the third piece that goes
Okay.
with it.
if we suspect where we want to go for the path, then our decision in January can go one direction or that direction or split down the middle to facilitate what might be our ultimate direction or to work cross purposes to our ultimate. If we decide we want to minimize open enrollment over the long term and we take over 100 more open enrollment students next year, and then we have sibling preference, we will have.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I feel awkward because I know there's been a call to adjourn the meeting for a few minutes now. And so I want to honor it, but at the same time, there have been statements where we're not trying to divest. I want to be very clear. And there is a pathway to keep status quo. But I think what I'm hearing, if I may just paraphrase what I'm hearing, there's two decisions you have to make. You have to make an immediate decision for next year. If you want to have the larger conversation around the pathway of open enrollment for the future, that's a different conversation.
The policy committee also needs a few things decided because we're not following our policy.
That as well.
Right, that's another piece of it.
There will be a lot more conversation on this. I will agenda an additional time. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris, Dr. Hoig,
Yes.
Ms. Willis, Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Roland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger,
Yes.